All right, get ready to go. Start the Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to our January meeting. Notice the time and place of these committee meetings was publicized by notifying the area news media, by updating the OPPD website, and by mailing such notice to each of the district directors on January 2nd, 2018. So, welcome all. Looks like everybody's here ready to roll. And Tim, we're going to go for a safety briefing.
Yes, obviously we have a fire extinguisher just to the back of the room right here. Location of the AED and the first aid kit are to the right of the elevators, next to the wall, one on top of each other. There's also a first aid kit there. Location of the exit, obviously there's two exits here. In the event of a fire, we would not use the elevator. We would use the steps, go all the way down to the first level and exit on the 17th Street side of the building. Any other emergency, we could use the elevator to move down to the main level and seek shelter. We don't anticipate any severe weather, at least no tornadic weather today. Maybe a storm or so in the coming days here. But obviously, we would seek shelter in the garage level, which is a secured area. The restrooms are down at the end of the hall here and to the left and to the right. Women's to the left and men's actually straight ahead in the hallway here. Again, don't use the elevators in case of a fire. If you have a medical condition, please write it down or tell your neighbor. I think, who would call 911?
I can.
Okay, Kim will call 911. She has her phone here ready to go. Very good. Is anybody here certified in the use of an AED or in CPR? Most of the senior team now should, and looks like quite a few folks within the room. So with that being said, that's the safety briefing. Thank you.
We all feel much safer after all those hands going up, that's for sure.
Very good. Very good.
All right, with that, just one comment though, and I just want to make sure for everyone, and I haven't talked to a whole lot of you since the last meeting, but, so we have our election Thursday for new officers. Any of those committees, you know, the committees you want to be on or whatever, the new chair, whoever's elected, the new chairperson, will decide those committees, okay? And then we will have those assigned and voted on in February.
I believe.
I'm just kind of going through some of the details. So if you want to be on a certain committee after that election, talk to that person. I think like governance, that's the one committee I think that is set in stone. It's the chair, past chair, vice chair. So other than that, I think most committees are open. It's always been kind of what's your interest, moving people around, I think, and however that goes. But
even though the committee chairs are voted on in February, historically, have we generally assumed they would go as anticipated? And I guess at the February committee meetings and such, are the new chairs usually taking over by then? I'm trying to remember how that worked.
So we typically would transition from January and February with the current chairs in place.
Okay, all right.
Except for the chair of the board, right? So that'll be
Okay.
voted on Thursday.
Okay.
And then effective on that February, Thursday of the committee assignments going forward would be the committee chairs. And they typically run through that 12-month period through January of the next year,
Okay.
historically.
yeah, and then, well, then also under this new structure, of course, it's a little different how those committee chairs work. I think we're still feeling out what that means to be a committee chair. You know, if we have the SDs, you kick them back to that committee, so that's an important role of the committee. But other than that, as we're doing these pre-committee hearings as committee of the whole, everyone's hearing the same thing at the same time, so it is what it is. There's something to it. It's good to be focused on that particular area, but you gotta focus on everything here, let's face it. So, anyway, so I throw that out there just because I know people, we've talked back and forth one-on-ones here and there. So that's kind of where we're at, so. And then on nominations and all that, in the next, everyone will be talking and we'll see who gets that. They haven't been too controversial in the past, I don't see it. Hopefully it won't change in the future, so.
We don't want 214 votes.
Yeah, to find out, yeah. We've avoided that so far. So far, so good. So. All right, with that, we'll turn over. Oh, and one more thing, too. I do want to say, with the passing of Rich Hurley, and then I know with new members this year, too, it's been good with Rick, Craig, and then with Director Hurley passing away. You know, that meant others had to step up, and Ann, I know you helped a lot. Thank you very much for taking dual roles, same with Mick and Mike and everyone else, and that's kind of stepped up, and I think we've adjusted to that, because Director Hurley actually was committee chair of 2 committees, and so we had to kind of dole that out a little bit after he passed away, and I know you were just stepped up, and same with all of you. So I appreciate that. So next year, hopefully everything goes a little smoother. We had a healthy new year, exactly, things happen. But I did want to put that out there, so thank you very much. Okay, with that, Director Mines on the finance, we'll have a finance.
Well, obviously, we're going to turn that over to our expert, Javier.
Javier?
Good morning, everyone. This month is different than the rest of the other 12 months because we do not have financials. I'm not going to report on December financials as we are in the middle of closing the fiscal year. So traditionally, January is a month where we don't report on December financials. Again, we're busy. Today is actually one of the busiest days of the month for us. We're finalizing accruals, and we're ready to close the books by the end of the month. You will get a report once we get the books closed, but we don't have a financial report for that reason in January. But we do have two items, and I'm going to ask our Director of Finance, John Thurber, to present on both items. One is on pledged securities, and he's going to talk a little bit about that. And then the other one is an official report on our electric revenue bonds that we just closed in 2017.
Thank you, Javier. John Thurber, Division Manager of Finance. First, to report out on the pledged securities reporting item. This is a reporting item based on state statutes that we need to assure that we have insurance or pledged securities above balances at our bank accounts above the FDIC limits that are in place. And the reporting item is to assure you that we do have pledged securities. We have two main banks, Wells Fargo and First National Bank, that we hold balances above $250,000 on occasion, and we do have pledged securities from each of those banks that collateralized our balances above those amounts. Any questions about the reporting item?
Javier, have we looked at, reviewed Wells Fargo based on what's gone on with that institution over the last couple of years, all the scandals and the fraud and all the bad things that have occurred? Have we taken a look at our posture with them to see if they're really an appropriate partner?
We have, and to be fair, not only to Wells Fargo, I think Wells Fargo is one of many other banks that have had issues in the past, and we have looked at that, and we've also looked at the interest of the district and where are our funds well collateralized, where are we getting the best returns, where are we getting the lowest fees, and so far that institution came out as a solid institution for us to continue to do business with. Without getting into the politics, we didn't see anything that immediately affected our ratepayers, and on the other hand, we thought we think still that it is a good business partner. Now the question goes back to the board. If you would like for us to consider something different than we have considered so far, we would be happy to include that in our review.
How often do we review those relationships and take them out for bid?
We review those relationships on an annual basis, and depending on how long the relationship has been in place, we take them out for bid.
About every 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
Right.
Are there other attributes we might want to consider?
I just have a general concern when an organization of that size has a fraud committed on that scale. I mean, there was thousands of people involved. They laid off 5,000 people because of it. And it went all the way very, very high in the organization. So that just concerns me because it goes to culture. It says something about their culture as an institution. They were a very highly respected bank. I don't take that away from them, but I wouldn't personally bank with them, okay? That's just a personal statement, okay? So I just want to know, I mean, banking
I
is
concur
banking.
with what Mark is saying. I think when you look at the Wells Fargo, it was a systemic problem, and they were doing stuff that was fraudulent and highly illegal. And I don't know if they're a good partner to accept our money and enjoy the use of our money. And I haven't reviewed it, and Javier and John are more of an expert of that, but I just support what Mark says.
And again, this is less on the retail concern or issue that you're expressing.
Right.
We certainly understand that, and I think we've had some discussion and dialogue certainly about that, and certainly the steps that they have taken or have been forced to take, they're taking those steps. But I'll just share from our perspective as we look at from the return and the collateralization of these assets and the fees of these assets, these are the two options that we would consider that would provide the ratepayers the best financial benefit and us the greatest flexibility.
Right.
So, but again, if the board wants us to readdress that, we can certainly readdress.
So,
If you would change, it would cost quite a bit. It might be some cost on our part to do that, is what you're saying.
And there are limited banks that actually can do the services that we're asking them to do. And that's kind of,
Yeah.
at least here where we can have a relationship fairly locally, those are the main banks that really can provide those kind of services that we are asking our bank to do.
you gotta be
And this
large
isn't the only bank that we use. Obviously you can look at all the rest of the banks.
Sure.
We use multiple different banks.
These two are the largest ones
Yeah.
are the two that can collateralize our deposits. There are many other local, smaller banks that could not, in an economical way, accept the amount of deposits that we have with these two larger banks, just because of the collateralization requirements. Doesn't mean that that there aren't other options, but it would be a higher.
So it must be very large, like a U.S. bank or somebody like that. I mean, so we have two tiers of banking then, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
The big commercial banks that can deal with a billion-dollar company, and then the community banks where we have deposits and we might do some things. Is that how we run our banking?
Yeah, the
system?
smaller banks generally accept bill payments for us, and we
Yeah.
move those monies daily, so we don't keep large deposits at those banks.
And First National being a Nebraska bank as
Yeah.
well, that's a good,
Yeah.
they've done a great job. But, so who, if we were to look around, who would be other options, just off the top of your head? I mean,
Well, U.S. Bank, we've had a relationship in the past with them. It's possible that other banks, like a UMB Bank or other, what I would say
Chase,
mid,
Bank of America,
Yeah.
Merrill Lynch, many other national banks, and we could.
They're not local.
There are banks.
Right.
My comment to Director Triton was, most of those banks have also had issues. So happy to discuss these in depth. I would just caution that any policy direction that we take, that the board takes here, will limit our pool of eligible banks in the future, potentially at the detriment of ratepayers. Not to say that it's a bad decision, but it's important to balance the other side of the coin of what would happen if we limit the.
Yeah, that's fair. What, you said it was 3 to 5 years, when are we scheduled to go out for bid again? Is that
well,
firm?
we're certainly going to look at them very rigorously this year. If not this year, then next year.
Okay. And is that, I would assume that's not something that needs a board approval, right? That would be a reporting item, so when
It is a reporting
you go
item.
through that process, you'd come back to us and tell us, kind of summarize what you learned and heard and.
Now, based on this discussion, what I would probably do is, before we review and before we go out for bid, I would ask probably the Finance Committee for input on selection criteria, if there's any update, and then have the board weigh in if there's an appetite for that.
And based on the conversation here today, I think any of the folks that we would actually engage with, we would do our own investigation of some of their past history and ask them to identify what mitigating strategies they've put in place to regain our trust in their work, regardless of what bank it may be, so.
So the mechanics of moving forward, if we were to do so, I see that one attribute of our decision-making is that the banks are within our service area at this point. So as you pointed out, there are other banks outside of the service area that could compete. And I value the fact that we try to keep our money in our service area. I think that's a good deal. But in terms of Mark's concern, I'm still struggling a little bit to understand what the measure would be that we would use. Is it the fact that they have, committed a felony of this size, or, how would we articulate that? And maybe that's for the finance committee for the next discussion. But I think that's what we're reaching for here, right? Is that there is some marker that we would use that would outweigh the fact that they operate within our service area. Is that the decision point we're talking about?
Let me say this. I had a lot of relationships with Wells Fargo when I was treasurer of Valmont. I still have friends that work for Wells Fargo.
Sure.
Okay, it's a huge institution nationally. They aren't really based in our service area. They happen to have a branch here. Okay, I think they're based in San Francisco, I think.
Okay.
But for me, I'm not trying to establish the criteria, Rick. I'm just saying at a certain point, some things are untenable to me. And basically, I would break my relationship with them if it was my money. Okay, I just won't deal with a bank that was ultimately that corrupt that had to be told to clean it up.
Right.
And there's been at least one echo of that scandal since. So I realize January, February are the worst time of year for the finance people to deal with this. They've got to close the books and get it all buttoned up. But I would encourage you to look strongly at other banking. And Javier, I absolutely respect you. There are so many big banks out there, enormous. And if we were just limiting this to Nebraska banks, then I'd be concerned. But New York and Chicago, now they're full of huge banks.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just see if there's an alternative.
Okay.
Okay?
So your review then occurs summer?
Yeah, it
Third
was going to
quarter?
occur later in the year. Obviously, we can accelerate that if the board feels that we need to accelerate it. But, I think it's a normal process that we go through every year, usually, midsummer or a little later than that, just to review our banking relationships. Are the fees that we're getting comparable to other banks? With banking relationships, the ability to contact people, to make sure that when you have to move money today, that you can actually reach somebody is critically important. And so those things are very, very important to us in the way that we manage and handle our funds. And so certainly there's a lot of aspects that we go and look at when we look at banking relationships. And I'd like to be able to kind of go through this through a matrix of various
Don't
issues.
panic. We're not
Right.
saying you
Right.
have to do it.
But thank you
This is a
very
great
much for raising
example.
the issue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is a good example too of why I think we move these meetings to full committee. Because you have a question, you'd never even hear this if we just did it the old, it's gonna come to finance and to you. But now, so the next step would be as whoever the chair is or whatever, we brought it to your attention. I think there's enough interest around here to say, oh, I better follow up on that. And then that will go to the finance committee to say, hey, what are the pros and cons of looking around and who could we go with? And then bring it back and have another discussion. And we won't do it overnight, John, so. you
Okay.
get the panic look on your face. It's like, but this would be, something to look at as we do our reviews and
I
keep in
think
mind.
it's great sensitivity for us
Yeah,
to
I agree.
think
I
about
think,
as we
yeah.
move forward, so I appreciate
And we do
the
have
insight.
contracts with the banks existing, so we have to be mindful of that also.
Right. I've had a couple local bankers too, of course, and Javier and I have met with a couple, just, how's it work? How's your banking work at OPPD? They're just doing their thing and asking. And Javier's been very good about that, and Tim has over the past, and everybody has. So if you ever have any questions from the local scene, feel free. Okay.
The next
Move on.
item to report on is the issuance of our 2017 A bonds. Back in September of last year, the board gave us authority to issue up to $250 million worth of electric system revenue bonds for advanced refunding purposes. That authority went through the end of 2018. And as the board, I know, is aware, we did issue bonds in December for advanced refunding purposes. We refunded a portion of our 2011 B bonds and 2012 A bonds. The total principal amount of the bonds that we issued were $220,195,000. Had a final maturity of 2042, and the average interest rate was 3.625%. Which is over 1% less than what our old bonds were that we did defease. The debt service savings that we received on the advance refunding was will be receiving is $22.3 million over the life of the bond issue. That equates, right, present value, $22.3 million.
Total savings are larger
Yeah.
than that.
And then 9.6% savings compared to the principal amount of the bonds that we sold. So it was a very successful bond issue. It was actually 32 days between the point where we decided to move forward and we actually went to the market and priced the bonds, which is a record as far as the quickness that we moved forward. Obviously, there were tax law changes that we were trying to get in front of before the end of the year, and we were able to successfully do that. And the bonds settled on December 20th. And so really want to thank the board for the authority up front, the senior management team and the disclosure committee members for their quick review of the bond documents, corporate accounting for their review of updated financials, and then the team, my financing team that went through and helped prepare all the documents. It was a very successful deal. Very, very competitive interest rates in the marketplace that we ended up with.
And he's very humble, and really, he was running the show, so I publicly acknowledge John for his leadership.
Thank you, John.
Great job.
Do you know, John, can you discuss how you feel the new tax law is going to affect us for bond refinancing in the future?
Well, it will, because we don't have the ability to do what they call an advance refunding, which is you issue bonds, you buy an escrow of securities that pays the debt service until the bonds can be paid off. Now you have to wait until the bonds can be paid off before you do a refunding or an advance refunding. It will delay our quickness that we can move forward with this. We still have current refundings in the years in the future, so we will be doing current refundings. That's where you pay off bonds immediately or within a very short period of time. But it will delay the quickness that we can move and essentially delay the quickness that we can receive the debt service savings. So it will impact us. We're looking at ways that we can maybe try to mitigate some of that, but there is an impact.
It's really continue optimizing our debt portfolio, and something that John and I are working on for 2018 and beyond. And I'm a glass half full person today, and to me the biggest win for the district was the retention of the tax exemption provision, which at some point was on the table, right? And so the fact that we can continue to issue tax exempt debt, not only us but every other government in the nation, I think that is the biggest win. Losing the advanced refunding opportunities, it's not great, but it's not dramatic. It'll just delay any further savings that we may be able to achieve.
And this kind of pre-approval of us to move forward doesn't happen across all large public power council companies. And so, you're allowing us to do that, allowed us to take advantage of almost $250 million in a market that changed relatively quickly from a Thursday to a Tuesday, allowed us to get into the market and give us all the flexibility in the world to execute it and provide the savings. And if we would have waited for that, and then the law changed, we would not have been able to receive these savings. So you're allowing us to do that, gave us the flexibility to execute, and I really appreciate that. And not all public power districts get that capability to do that. And so I just want to thank you for that.
And I would add to Tim's comments, if we hadn't had that pre-approval, I wouldn't say that we wouldn't have been able to do it by the end of the year, but it would have been very, very difficult to get it done by the end of the year. So again, thank you for your willingness to grant us that authority. Thank you.
Thank you. That's it for the Finance Committee.
All right. Ann, you want to walk us through nuclear oversight?
Okay, nuclear oversight. I'll have Mary Fisher give the report of nuclear oversight, and she's also going to give the report of not only just a nuclear committee plus nuclear oversight. John Hansen's previous role, Mary will discuss right now.
Thank you. Good morning. Several things to report on the Nuclear Oversight Committee. First of which, I'm going to start at the bottom of the reporting item and really start with preventative maintenance and surveillance tests. As we went into 2017, part of the activity that was going on at Fort Calhoun was to really look at the systems that could be abandoned. And as we went through the course of the year, over the first 6 months of the year, because we could not abandon those systems quickly, and that's really due to Nuclear Regulatory Commission requirements. It takes a period of time to do that. All of the engineering evaluations needed to be done. That remained that we needed to continue to do the required maintenance and surveillance tests of systems. And so what you see here is a record of what we did in 2017, over 5,800 maintenance activities, and then 732 surveillance activities. What we've done over the course of 2017 is to be able to abandon those systems properly, do the engineering evaluations, and so you'll see a huge reduction in 2018. This is a balance of plant work that we don't talk a lot about, but there's a lot of time and effort that is put in there by our employees to maintain these activities. And so I just want to make sure that I hit on that and really give them their due, because it has been quite an enormous undertaking, both from an engineering perspective to abandon those systems, as well as from a maintenance side to maintain those systems over the course of 2017. Into 2018, we have abandoned what we can. We've reduced the surveillances and the maintenance that we can. And what you'll see going forward in 2018 is a reduction in that, but we will continue to do those systems that are necessary for spent fuel cooling. So you'll see a reduction, but I just want to give them their due over the course of 2017. Also, in December of 2017, we did some modifications to our auxiliary boiler. Auxiliary boiler is sized for the plant, and so what we've been trying to do is to do a reduction of what we need in terms of fuel oil to run that over the winter for heating. So we did a modification there that will allow us to do that. We believe that this modification will provide about 65% reduction in the fuel oil that we need over this winter. So quite an accomplishment there from both our engineering and our operations staff to get us through that. In addition to that, as the fuel oil has been coming in, we've been having some issues with the chemistry of that fuel oil. In December, we had 3 loads of fuel oil that were rejected. We still have requirements that we have to meet from a Nuclear Regulatory Commission, as well as the standards of what can go into our fuel oil tank, and so we have to maintain that. As a result of that, over the last probably 15 to 20 days, we've done a number of things. Our supply chain got on board, and they helped us find a new terminal, still the same supplier, but a new terminal that's helping us to meet those requirements more consistently. And then our engineering folks got together and figured out a way to reduce some of the requirements that we have to make it easier to get fuel oil in, which will also be a cost reduction for us going forward. So great work on the part of those 2 teams. I'll talk a little bit about asbestos abatement. We've done that over the course of 2017. I'm pleased to report, as of this morning, I saw the report that the turbine deck is completely finished now. It's a little slightly different than what's in the reporting item, but now we'll be moving our asbestos removal over into the radioactively controlled area of the RCA. So we'll start moving into other areas of the plant. Excuse me. Last thing I want to talk about is the amendment that we received, Amendment 295, which really allows us to reduce our emergency plan at the end of our ZERC fire period in April 7th of 2018. And so that plan has been received and approved by the NRC. And what that means for us is we can go ahead and put all of the implementation plans in effect, and then they will go into effect on April 8th. And so we're planning to do that. So as soon as we can, we'll make that reduction. What that means is we can no longer have an accident that would go beyond the site boundary. Everything would be inside the site boundary, and so all of those outside entities that helped respond over the course of a number of years at Fort Calhoun are no longer necessary, and so we'll be reducing our emergency response plan just to the site only. And so that's what that amendment does for us.
We'll still continue to work with local law agencies and those kinds of things as we have historically.
Yes, we have maintained our contracts with local law enforcement, as well as the Med Center, in terms of any accidents that we would have, they would help to respond. So, we're not planning on any accidents, we're not going to have any accidents, but it's good to know that we're planning just in case we do. We have a response plan in place.
So, just curious, since the plant is no longer producing power, is there some deadheading activity that has to happen on the transmission lines as well? And has that occurred?
So the transmission lines are still operational and functional. It's an important aspect for us to be able to maintain our transmission system, and so it continues to operate. What
Okay.
happens is it's just disconnected from the plant site itself.
Yeah, so there's
except for
a small
house
amount
power.
of work there.
Except for house power that we need.
Right, the substation transmission line, part of the grid, so, regardless of where Calhoun, you still need that.
Okay, thanks.
Mary, on this first bullet. Oh, that's a pretty substantial savings, 65%. Can you talk a little bit about the transition that we're making in terms of consolidating staff into certain buildings and kind of what our process has been for determining which buildings it's going to be and?
Sure. We did an analysis at the end of 2016 as we were moving into decommissioning, and early in 2017, we abandoned what we called the service building. The service building housed engineering, some of the operations staff, the NRC's office was there when we had a resident inspector. And that building needed a lot of maintenance, and so it was one of the first buildings that we targeted was to do that reduction. We've gone to what we call cool and dim. So the lighting is low-level lighting, and the heating is down to just a minimal, just to make sure that we don't freeze any pipes, that sort of thing. We've also looked at other areas where we consistently have maintenance problems, so that's kind of been the first target. We moved over the summer folks out of the old chemistry area. We've consolidated all of them into a different area, so that part has been abandoned. The latest is at the end of December, we went through an evaluation about what we should do with the administration building and the training center. And we've decided that we're going to move everybody out of the administration building into the training center. We've done that specifically because it's a smaller footprint, easier to heat, easier to cool. It will accommodate the number of people that we continue to have. Some of those folks need to eventually move into the plant itself, and so we're providing areas within the plant for some of those folks to move. So we're really looking at the functions that they do and where they should be located based on those functions.
Okay. And we anticipate hanging on to buildings in a cool and dim?
Cool and dim.
Cool and dim state for how long roughly?
Until we make a determination as to what we want to do with them in the long term.
Okay.
And so we are working with economic development and our land folks to make that determination. We've been working with them for about the last 6 months, so they've been looking at an overall plan about what we need to do eventually.
It's going to be there long term. Okay.
But it is a longer-term
Sure.
plan, probably not till kind of the 2020 timeframe.
Okay.
That's what's kind of in my head, maybe 2022, but kind of in that range.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, I'll report on nuclear oversight. We have Randy Hugenroth, which is the head of our nuclear oversight. He's the one that does our quality assurance to make sure that we're doing everything that we need to do in terms of meeting NRC requirements and our quality requirements at the plant site. Over the course of December, at the December board meeting, John reported out that we were doing a management assessment regarding the Exelon procedures and the Exelon management model, and the fact that we were asserting that we had indeed gotten rid of all of their procedures and any references to the management model so that we could cease our licensing requirements with Exelon. They did that in early December. John reported out in December. Subsequent to that, as they were finishing up their audit of that, they found that we had made some procedural errors in terms of not putting in the requirements for our safety-related equipment. And really what that was is that we were not giving written instructions. We were not procedurally required to give written instructions for safety-related systems. We still have safety-related systems associated with spent fuel cooling. So they've rectified that, made sure that they've gone back in and changed that. It was really just an oversight in separating between non-safety related and safety related systems. So in December, early in January, we wrote a condition report to make sure that we corrected that problem. They also have been looking at the fuel oil chemistry problem and have been helping us to determine the quality related requirements that we have, and been instrumental in the engineering change that I referred to earlier. So out of everything that has been done over the past month from the Nuclear Oversight Committee, I think those are the only two things that I have to report.
I would share from a nuclear oversight, we're having a conversation around organizational kind of separation from a nuclear oversight from within the operating unit. So we'll probably bring back to the nuclear oversight committee kind of a recommendation in the next month of what that may look like. And so we'll be meeting here in the next week or so to firm that up. Yeah, right.
I'm sorry, I'm just really curious. What is the fuel oil problem? And is this something that other purchasers of fuel oil need to look at, or we just have really high specs, or?
We have pretty high standards
Okay.
based on the requirements that we have for the tank as well as the Nuclear Regulatory Commission requirements. And it was really, the issue that we were having was really around the specific gravity of the oil itself that was going into the tank. And so we've resolved that issue, I believe.
Fair enough.
And it could be as simple as, and it sounds simple when I say it, I'm sure it's not. When you replace one kind of oil with a different kind of oil in the same tank, just enough of that residue can create a different
Right.
specific gravity and not meet the specs. And we've looked at, I think, those specs and can we modify or change those? And so we're kind of working through what that looks like long-term. But we're required to meet the current specs that we have today and
We are.
the current policy that we have today.
And as I said, we've taken a look at that to see how we can, if there's a range that we can put in there that's a little more, gives us a little more tolerance, and we've taken that action as well.
Thank you.
The good news is that we're saving a lot of money because we're only using about
65%.
65%
Correct.
less than we used to. So this is much, that's very good news.
Right.
Well, and they continually look at cost. I mean, they've de-energized the GS, so several transformers on site where they've been able to de-energize them, so it's not obviously using energy to maintain all the piece there. We have the capability to use it when we need it, if we need to use it. They're shutting down lights and pumps and operations that were not necessarily needed. So, we don't want to use that energy internally. We want to be able to keep that for our customers or in the market and have that capability to do that.
Right. And that's the consolidation of the buildings as well that
Yeah.
you're referring to also helps with that.
And our staffing by June 1st is still going to be 349 this year.
Correct. Correct. I think we're at year-end at 383 employees, and our target is 349 by June 1st.
If there's no other questions, then we can continue.
All right, thank you very much.
Public information.
A lot of things going on, public information.
Okay, the committee met on December 21st to discuss the items we have on our agenda today. The first one will be our monthly update on the Nebraska legislature, and Tom Richards is here to go ahead and tell us where we're at. Things are in full swing.
Thank you.
You're off guard almost.
I had it in my hand. Good morning. We're at the second session of the 105th Nebraska Legislature, 60-day session, adjourning approximately April 17th. Bills are being introduced. As of yesterday when I left, there were 249 bills introduced in the legislature, new bills that are going to be evaluated and introduced at the legislature. I tell people at this stage, so you're watching the activity going on from bills from last year, because they started yesterday debating bills from last year. So in the afternoon they're doing that, in the morning they're introducing bills. So it's kind of like being a traffic cop watching what's going on. So the activity has stepped up. The speaker has said he wants to not waste any time. He's already scheduled things. He's already moving forward with those commitments that he made to the body. One bill was introduced on behalf of OPPD. Senator Burke Haar introduced a bill for OPPD of obstructing a public power worker. It spells out some language about if you interfere with a public power worker in the course of their business and their activities for OPPD, that you could be charged with a Class 1 misdemeanor. We've had some situations where people have been harassed and harangued out in the field, and this would address a portion of the law that's not currently in law. I worked with Senator Chambers and the committee to get this bill introduced. Senator Chambers actually helped me with some suggestions, and I don't know if that means he's for or against, but he helped me with suggestions, and that's usually a good sign that he's not going to interfere with the process. It must be such a good bill that I've had others who want to join on now. My response is, you work with Senator Chambers, and if you can get him to sign off on it, then God bless you and have at it. So we'll see how that all shakes out. The NPA Legislative Subcommittee is meeting on a regular basis. We started last Wednesday, and we will meet tomorrow again. We kind of work as a group to evaluate bills. I mean, you got what's left over from last year plus 249 ones. 249 new ones, so we work as a group to evaluate what kind of impact, what the bill says, details of it, and we range from everywhere from 3 or 4 lawyers to people who have done it for a long time, and we have a pretty good grasp of what the bills do. I won't have positions for you this month, but I'll have positions for you for next month. That's kind of where we're at this point, so questions?
Hey, have they voted on the speaker and committee heads?
They do that in the first session, so those roles move over from the first session to the second session.
Okay.
Those are already in place. They adopted the rules yesterday with very little debate. So last year it was 30 or 40 or 50 days before they adopted the rules. They adopted last year's rules, and they're moving forward already with those rules in place.
Are there any bills out there that are trying to limit wind development?
The one that I've seen that that's a carryover from last year. LB 504 is one that a moratorium on building wind projects in the Sandhills, and it defines the space in the Sandhills. That bill is still in committee, and if it's still in committee at this point, I don't look for it to come out. There's a bill on transmission about using private developers using right-of-way of a political subdivision for transmission of power for a private purpose. We're evaluating that one. I'm guessing that one would have some impact on wind development.
Is the construction of public power workers, is that specific to public power employees, or
It is.
Contractors aren't included?
It does not include contractors.
And typically, what we're looking for is that, an employee that is required to go to the rear lot line to do work that maybe, and we've had several instances where our employees have been almost physically accosted with a taser, with a threat, one with a weapon, and we're just trying to raise the issue and protect the safety of our men and women that are out in the field. And sometimes this is at 2 o'clock in the morning, sometimes it's 8 o'clock in the morning or 2 in the afternoon, but we just want to make sure people understand the safety. And again, they're just trying to restore power, they're trying to provide a service, trying to make sure the meters operate, so they're doing all the right stuff.
Yeah, there are many laws on assault and terroristic threats and felony types of things. This is kind of a lower step kind of approach, meaning, that's why it's a misdemeanor. But it's kind of a catch-all that if it turns into a he said type of situation, if the criteria are met for obstructing that worker from doing his or her work, then they could be charged with this law if it's passed. No big hitters at this point. This is day 5. We have 5 more days to go. So usually the last 20 minutes of the 10th day is when things start to percolate.
Hey, Tom, I've got a question on narrowing down these bills. I know that you follow way more than you report to us because there's so many that affect in one way or another the company. But how do you narrow those down as far as what you bring to the board's attention? Things we're introducing, of course, but do you guys have a process of the way to let down? Because I know there's another 300 bills to be entered.
So
40 of them will have to do with us.
Yeah, so what happens is the NPA reviews the bills. We have a tracking sheet where the NPA tracks bills. I'll tell you that my sheet is much smaller than theirs. They get involved in things that from OPPD standpoint that I don't think we need to be involved in. So the next step, once I get it whittled down to the ones I think OPPD should take, we try not to involve ourselves in issues that don't involve us. So we work really hard at that. The next phase is Lisa and I meet. We review the bills that I am recommending that we take positions on. Normally, we might have one or two that we scan down, take it down from there. But at that point, Lisa and I review the bills. Senior management takes the final steps, and then I come back to the board with the final bills that we're going to track. So it starts with a wide net and gets narrowed down to ones that I really think have impact on OPPD and that OPPD needs to be involved in lobbying the legislature.
And probably a step that from when Tom gets it to when it comes to the senior management, we may involve subject matter experts, whether it's HR, labor relations, systems, planning, rates, could be a number of different subject matter expert groups, building services, that will look at that and understand the impact to us individually.
We're looking for any blind spots and so forth that could possibly happen going forward, so. Because as we know, it changes quickly.
Yeah.
So, all the time.
Anything else for me? Thank you. I'll go to Lincoln now.
The next item deals with strategic directives. This particular one is SD 13, and again, that was discussed in detail at the committee meeting in December. I was unable to attend the meeting. Mick and Craig did a lot of work on this, along with, as usual, Kim Tracy and Scott Foch. And anytime you gentlemen would care to jump into, that's fine also. Scott's going to go ahead and give us an update on where we're at. This will be in discussion form as far as proposed fine-tuning of SD 13, which deals with our stakeholder outreach and communication policies.
Great.
Scott?
Thank you. With regards to SD 13 or any of the SDs, I think it's important to go back a little bit and talk about the fact that there is a little bit of the history. So SD 13 was initially approved by the board on July 16th with resolution 6070, and then there were monitoring reports presented to the board on October 13th, 2016 and November 16, 2017, and through resolutions the board found OPPD to be sufficiently in compliance with the policy as stated. As Director Kavanaugh was indicating, the Public Information Committee met, and they actually met a couple of times to develop some recommendations for the board to consider in terms of the revised policy. As a quick reminder, in terms of the refinement process, during July 24th, board policy was discussed. At that time, Lisa Olson had recommended that they were going to be working on redrafting a policy, and the board concurred that that would be fine. So during the meetings with public information on both October 31st and the December 21st, the committee worked with Lisa and with Kim and myself really to determine what were the goals of this policy from a board perspective and what were the resulting recommendations in terms of change. So today, really where we are in the process is here, and it's an opportunity to share that revised language for the Public Information Committee to share their thinking with the board around that revised policy, and then it would be posted publicly pending any changes for public comment, and then brought to the board for approval on February 15th. It was a really, from my perspective, it was a very kind of clear and good, productive conversation. We used the model of facilitation that we had talked about in the July workshop, really focusing on the goals. And the goals that emerged, or the highlights that emerged, was the directors identified really 4 pillars upon which they wanted this policy to stand. One was that from a stakeholder and engagement perspective, there needs to be education and awareness. There's a real desire for customer owners to have a general understanding of OPPD, the key decisions they're making and how to best plug in. There was a desire to make sure that there was a strong, solid, and great mechanism through which this could happen, that there are meaningful ways for customer owners to participate and to provide feedback. That the process driving all of this is quality, the customer engagement is inclusive and representative of OPPD customer owners, and that we take this process, and we really apply continuous learning to it. As we know better, we do better. The intention is to always make sure that we have the best engagement and outreach possible, and we certainly learn things along the way. So at this time, with regards to this, I would ask the Public Information Committee members if there's any comment or reflections upon the discussion before we jump into looking at the revised proposal.
No, I think it's well, Scott, it was an interesting and enjoyable process to basically, I mean, for all intents and purposes, we started and built from the ground up, right? So that's why the red line version that you have is mostly red. I think for me, one of the things, if you go back just a second, Scott, the education awareness, and you'll see this as we get into this, is for me, context setting was important. So helping our customer owners understand all of the things that are happening around them when we ask them to engage. So, yeah, that's the quick version, I suppose.
Thank you. Director
From
Miles?
my perspective, we allow enough latitude to management to engage generally in a general way. In other words, we're not restricting them to certain processes. We're not requiring that many things that may not impact the ultimate goal. It's kept very simple, very open, and I think we're on target.
It'd be very hard to have a real strict, definite.
Yeah, you're in trouble if you do that. Yeah.
I thought it was great for the board to go back to, and it was the resolution, remember when we built the stakeholder process, of giving us that flexibility, but still we have that we're always going to plan, act, and measure, and so forth. So what we landed on really helped us with those lanes, and then when those projects come up, we'll determine what the matrices are and so forth. That will report back to the board in terms of engagement.
One of the highlights for me participating in that discussion too is really the conversation on the what and the how, and really focusing the policy and making sure that it was clearly defining what it was, the goal that the board would like to achieve through the policy. We had a lot of good conversations around how as well, and then we had to streamline that and come back up with a recommendation that really represented the thinking of the directors in terms of what they would like for you to consider. So you'd mentioned that it was very red, and here it is in your diligent, but there actually is an easier version for you to read. If you, there is and is it in here as well? Got it. In your diligent, there is a clean copy without the red. I think it's important for purposes of transparency to demonstrate here what has shifted, but if it's easier for you to read, there's also a version in your deck that highlights the changes.
If you guys agree, then we'll post that on the website for at least 30 days, public comment. So it will have the red line as well as the clean version for the public.
What is the official company position on customers versus customer owners?
Yeah.
We seem to go between
back and
the
forth.
two.
That's right.
What, they are both, but what's the official company line?
Well,
We
it's
always go
interesting.
back
So,
and
there are customer owners, right, that are attached to meters and part of our system, but we also have customers that may not be customer owners. So maybe our Nebraska City 2 Power Partners, we may do work outside our service territory with other customers that aren't necessarily customer owners, whether that's on the Iowa or Kansas or Hastings or Grand Island in the most recent example. And so, from this perspective, it's, as we've seen work around transmission and rates and even some of the conversations we've had around community solar, we've really focused on our customer owners, customers that we serve with our lines and meters and all the other services around that. And that's the feedback that we would get, and that's the engagement that we would get. We wouldn't necessarily go outside our service territory to engage our other customers around that necessarily. Now, that's how I would differentiate those two.
Be careful how you apply customer owner.
Can I, Can I add on to the confusion? So thank you, Mo, for, and your team for giving me a visual of the Swiss cheesy part of the south part of the territory. So there are in fact wholesale customers down there where the retail customer is not the OPPD customer, but they still vote for OPPD policy.
That's something different.
Oh, okay, all right.
I'm not going to get into the voting mishmash that goes on, and that's a whole different issue in county election processes. But from our perspective, let's say, I'll use Syracuse as an example.
Sure.
Syracuse is a customer owner of ours, the city of Syracuse. Now, we may provide services to a wholesale customer like Syracuse to their retail customers, right? That we may partner with them. That's part of the integrated energy marketplace strategy that we see developing very clearly. And we do that today with other customers across the state on Eco 24/7 and other kinds of things. So Syracuse is our customer. We're attached to them, we're connected to them, they're a customer owner. They get the opportunity to engage in anything that we do. But we may have customers on the other side of their meter, right? That we would still treat as a customer, get feedback and perspective on pricing and projects and product portfolio, whatever that may look like.
Indirect customers.
Thank you.
Or customers once removed.
It's confusing. Thank you.
Customer-in-law.
Customer is a lot broader term. Customer owner is very specific. Good thing to bring it up. It's a good discussion.
Good.
It was
Great
actually,
discussion.
yeah.
Any other
Actually, it
questions?
makes sense for
So,
me.
yeah, I appreciate all the work that's gone into this, and of course, I have a comment. I struggle with an opening statement that talks about an activity rather than an outcome. And so, I mean, something I might offer is that what we really seek is informed consent from our customers. That it's a term that I learned decades ago when talking about the public official's obligation in hazardous waste siting. And people should be informed to give their consent. That doesn't always mean it's activity. They aren't always writing in, but they accept our role as the person responsible. It's our mission to do whatever it is we're doing. We're acting reasonably, and we're listening to their concerns. So that might be a way I would approach that. Something, what we really want is to have these activities that make sure that we are operating with informed consent of our customers. So I'm not saying it's got to change. That would be my comments in there for the next 30 days.
Would that almost have to do with all of, if we're going to look at all of our SDs, that whether or not at the beginning you want to have an action versus a sort of like a mini outcome, as versus the outcome at the beginning. I think we have to go through all of our SDs for that, really, because it goes back and forth.
Remember flexibility.
That's
Don't
true.
lock yourself in one
That's
way or
true.
the other.
Either
I'm not
way,
saying
we
it's a
have a
bad
lot
idea,
of,
just
we have
don't
a
lock
lot of
yourself in.
action comments. I love it that the first 8 words so succinctly says, share context with customer owners for key decisions. I mean, it's almost what you're saying, share the context with customer owners for key decisions. It's wonderful, right there.
It took us a while to get there, right? And one of my concerns was that people could construe the word context and what sharing context is differently. So I guess I'm kind of interested in your perspective in particular on in your mind, what does it mean as we go through an engagement process? Once we make that determination that we need to go through the process, what does it mean to share context with customers?
Thank you for that, because we have engaged the team already to once you guys land on the language along with the public input, then we're putting those matrices together and so forth, and those definitions and so forth, so that we'll have clear definitions for that. So, and the matrix and scorecard to go along with it, so that when I report back out on SD 13 the next time, we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
So.
I point
So,
out this-
more to come on
More to
that.
come, okay.
You could change this
Right.
quickly, too.
If I diagram that first sentence as a publicly owned utility, OPPD is committed to engaging through outreach and engagement.
Right.
That's a little awkward.
Yeah.
You're engaging through engagement.
Okay.
And
We're
I
a little
think-
engagement happy.
Yeah,
It used to say communication, which
We
the title
changed
was
to
also
engagement.
communication, so that would be a decision on.
Well, I would change one of the two engagements to communication.
you could just say engage its customers, the community, and other stakeholders, period.
Yeah. You don't have to say how.
And then you go OPD shall, and then you go down and you say what they're doing.
Yes.
I agree.
So
Just say
take out
engage its
the
customers, the
through
community,
outreach and
and other
engagement.
stakeholders, period.
Yeah.
And then go down, OPD, to do that, OPPD shall,
red
bing, bing,
lines.
bing.
Yeah.
I love the companies.
And as a quick
we
point
never
of
put
order,
a read down.
the conversation right now is to make sure that we have something that's ready that we can publish for comment over the next 30 days. So prior to doing that, I'm hearing take out the through outreach and engagement, and put a period after stakeholders. And that would simplify the language there, make it clear.
Great.
Good, we'll do
Make it
that.
easy, we don't have to go back to Karen for that.
What a great job as far as.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful.
This is really being much more concise, but yet getting to the point. And I really like the idea of communication, getting rid of that with engagement part. I mean, that means a lot to everybody here, different.
It is different.
Very great job on all this. These are constructive criticism we're giving you, but this is just so much better and concise. It's very impressive. Good job.
I will share with you, Lisa is on an LPPC task force around stakeholder outreach and communication, and we've been held as a leader in this area very clearly. And the work that we've done and the processes that we put in place and the manner in which we reach out to customers for input and perspective on normal things that maybe you don't actually see at the board level, on operating things that we do, but also the things that you do see around rates, around transmission, around siting, around other feedback and input, community solar as an example as well. So it's good to know that these are really driving us to kind of lead in the, certainly a group that we compare ourselves with.
Lisa has given, presentations at national meetings about the stakeholder process that we have and the ongoing changes that we're doing.
And the part of this is that we're going to continue to look at it, right?
Right.
In terms of how can we continue to be best in class, so.
Are there any additional actions you'd like us to consider before posting this for public comment?
That's great.
Other than what we've already said? I don't have any.
And Director Yoder, I believe you had said your comment you consider as part of the 30-day kind of input.
No, I'll pull it out. I'm happy that with the
Just to
amendment that
Yeah.
Director McGuire mentioned, it removes the action item there
Great.
on that, which is what I was trying to get at.
All right, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
We got our feedback this month through the public, it all goes well, we'll be bringing it back up next month for a vote.
Perfect.
Thanks,
Beautiful.
Thank you. Great job.
Okay, our next item is SD 6, our safety, it's a safety monitoring reports and annual review to see if we're in compliance. And Tim, I see you want to just give it to Kevin?
Yeah, so I'll just prep this a little bit. So, Kevin is, directly engaged with the senior team, sits with the senior team at our Tuesday morning meetings, reports directly to me on safety and technical training related activity. And this is an area that we are continually looking for ways to improve in. And as we've reported last year was the best safety record from a injury and a DART perspective in 70 years of OPPD's history. I would say 2017 was not one of our best years. But Kevin will kind of speak through the things that we're doing and the activities that we're doing to try to regain some of that improvement that we've seen in previous years. And if you look at the 8 or 9 years of the safety division that we created to really focus in on industrial safety and organizational safety, we've really seen a significant reduction. But as part of the SD, we really want to be best in class. And so we've done some benchmarking. Kevin will talk a little bit about that, of some best-in-class in this area. And the senior team has had the opportunity to engage around it and really begin to identify activities within our 2018 key accountabilities around safety. And we have had some positive things around preventable vehicle accidents and those kinds of things that we've really seen significant reductions, and the organization has really responded to. And I'll let Kevin give the facts and the details. This is one of those SDs that we would say we're not in compliance because we're not meeting the standards that we've set for ourselves, but we believe we have the right policies, practices, actions in place to do, and Kevin will report through that.
Thanks, Dan. Good morning, everybody. I'm here to present monitoring report SD6 safety. Again, my name's Kevin McCormick, Director of Safety and Technical Training. And SD6, there's really two metrics that we follow when we look at the SD6. One being the DART rate, and DART stands for days away, restricted, or transferred cases. And our target for that in this SD is to be less than 0.50. We also measure preventable vehicle incident rate. And both of these, the definitions are down below, and how we calculate them is a mathematical equation. The target for the preventable is 4.0. And so I want to jump into the numbers. And so at the end of 2017, we ended up with 19 DART cases. And as Tim mentioned previously, we've been stepping down. So 9 years ago, actually, we were in the 50 category, 55 to 53 DART cases. And this past year, we ended up with 19. What 19 equates to is a DART rate of 1.06, which is well above our target for the year.
Kevin, do you have any particular incidents that are common?
Yeah,
All over the map.
we do. This year we had a lot of muscle strains, pulls. We work in bucket trucks, and so we reach out a lot. In storms, people do a little bit more lifting than they should. In this industry, with linemen and our craft workers, we're fighting the culture that they're macho, that they can do things without asking for help. And the culture we're trying to get to is that they will ask for help, and that's what we're working on.
You have high acceptance level of PPE and the rules of.
We do.
Okay.
Couldn't some of these be event-driven as well? For instance, the incident in Bellevue where we had high winds, we've got people out in dangerous situations. Would that drive your DART rate up?
So it's kind of interesting is when we get into a storm situation, we rarely have significant injuries.
Really?
Everybody takes their training, they look after each other, they take a break when they need to if they're tired. And so it's completely opposite of what you think. It's, I call it the fireman syndrome. When they're at the barnyard is when they get hurt. And it's kind of like us, is when they're out doing those emergency activities, we're pretty good.
I think if we looked at, and we do track internally the severity rate of these injuries, I would say the severity rate is relatively low, even though the incident is high. So these are soft tissue injuries, pulls, tears, strains, back, shoulders, arms, elbows, some slips and falls that has strained knees or those kinds of things. But we are still focused on the incident.
Yeah.
Like non-standard work. I mean, very non-standard work, non-standard environment that you're working in. It's a very aggressive goal. It really is. I applaud that.
In fact, to add what Tim mentioned, if you look at this SIF and that safety incident or fatality potential, we had 0 in 2017. So although we have a lot of soft tissue issues, but those serious ones, we really are doing very well.
We really don't, in this report, we really don't make any differentiation between the type of injury either, do we, as far as a serious one or not? Is it-
We don't. We look at that
Dark is dark,
internally
yeah.
for trend development and a number of other different things. But from the SD perspective, we think it's important to stay relatively clean to the dart because it's that incident that regardless of whether it's a soft tear or a soft tissue or a pull or a strain, it's still a dart, and it's still about this culture that Kevin talks about.
So the reason the dart's important is those take you away from your job. Days away, you're gonna miss a day or two.
Correct.
Other people have to fill in for you. A restriction is even though you're at work, you can't do your job to the fullest. And transfers, if you gotta be removed from that job completely. And so to me, that's a pretty good threshold.
Okay, thank you.
Do you,
Appreciate that.
Kevin, do you have an idea in terms of incidents by longer-term employees versus newer employees? Is there a bias there?
Yeah, so most of our injuries happen within 1 to 5 years after an apprentice turns out. And so they're fairly young, probably 9, 10 years with the company. And my philosophy behind that, I still think they're kind of mavericks. And then as you get older, the injuries seem to go down. Yeah, because what they're really doing is our older employees is they're sharing knowledge. And they're working with the younger employees. And so it's that sweet spot where they're still, probably in their 30s, early 30s, and they're out doing things.
Well, it gives you some idea of where to focus your efforts of training.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
The other thing of note on this, so if you look at 2013, we also had 20 DART cases there, but we had a lot more workers. So we're down about 400 workers, which equates to hours. And so we're looking at that as well. Preventable vehicle incident, this year we had 13. And one thing we do with these is we look at how many happen on property versus off property. And it's still amazing to me that sometimes we can't get out of the barn. And some of these, we're just running into something 5 feet in front of the vehicle. And so really what we're promoting here is human performance techniques, like a 360 walk around your car. We prefer that people back into a parking space because when you're pulling up to it, you should be able to observe all the hazards. And then that way, when you back up, it's safer than if you do it when you get in your car to leave. And so some of those things we've been promoting over the last few years. And as you can tell with that, we're well below the target set. And so overall, we're doing a really good job there. I also think it's important to share a little bit more than just the ones that we talk about in SD6. The top box, Mo mentioned it a little bit, and that's serious injuries and fatalities or the potential of. We've been tracking these for about 4 years. I learned it from a company called BST. They presented it to the industry, and not only our industry, but it really came out of the oil companies, where they were having injuries, not only injuries, but serious ones and fatalities, even though they were lowering some of the lower injuries. And they're cross-cutting, and they were finding the potential in near misses. They were finding them in DART cases. And then if a fatality, of course, they found it. And so everything that's reported at OPPD, we do a screening for SIFT or potential SIFT. And so this is a pretty good chart showing that we take these serious, and every one of the SIFTs or potential SIFTs, we do a deep dive. We have a cross-functional team that investigates each one of those, and we come out with the learnings. And those learnings are shared across the whole company, and then we implement those. And so what I see, what this shows me is that we're doing well at implementing those corrective actions.
Even if there isn't an injury, but we have an incident,
Yep.
we still do the screening. So We may not have an injury, but we have a SIF that we've identified, so.
And to show you what kind of injuries these are, is the last SIF we had an arc flash incident at Offutt Air Force Base, the end of the year in 2016, where one of our employees got burnt fairly bad on the hand, and then a contractor from Offutt was burned as well. And so those are the type of things that are SIFs, or potential SIFs.
Do we track near misses?
We do.
And good cat, you'll see, it's coming up here, so.
And so the bottom screen, I think it's also important to talk about things beyond first aid. So if you look at total injuries for the company, in 17, we ended with 29, which is actually the second best in company history. And so what those are is injuries that weren't deemed a DART case, but they had to go to the doctor. They might require 2 or 3 stitches, came back to work, didn't have any restrictions. And so those are way down. And so 10 years ago, what Tim talked about when we reduced, we used to have 100 to 130 of those a year 10 years ago. And so we're driving that number down. And so to me, between the preventable, the DARTs, and these two kind of shows you the flavor and the direction we're going with safety.
Set a little context for how we compare to the rest of the utility industry with some of these metrics? I don't know if I missed that or not, but.
So from an APPA perspective, we've come in second and third place the last 5 years. So at the end of the year, we turn in all our numbers, and everybody else does in the utility industry, and then we find out where we rank.
And so that's as measured by these 3 metrics that you just shared with us?
That is correct.
Okay.
Hey, Kevin, how does somebody who's in the field, how do they get to the management side to announce a safety problem? Or is there whistleblower protection or safe harbor, or is there any retribution about somebody who says, what I'm doing is unsafe, and another different person says, we got to get that job done?
Yeah.
That's where the rub is.
So we do have a lot of different ways to get information up. We have, by state statute, we have to have safety groups that go down to the craft level that they can raise safety concerns. So we have all those in place. We also have monthly safety meetings that they can raise it up. But I don't think we're exactly where we need to be. And what I mean by that is I went out and did these idea generation sessions with our employees. I held 5 of them, and what I heard in some isolated places, that people are still scared to bring up injuries. And so I brought that to the attention of senior management, and we're working on how to fix that. Because that's a culture we don't want in this company.
So that's exactly the culture we're trying to change. And what we're doing, we're building that trust and relationship between management and the field people. We're doing observations where we go out to the field and talk to the employees and make sure that they know that we've got their back. If they're making the right decisions, they need to make sure that they communicate that feedback to us, whether it's tools, whether it's processes. So, and I think it's starting to resonate. I think that trust and relationship is starting to really pay dividends. And we're being very transparent. We're focusing on accountability. We're making sure the expectations are well known, but we're also making sure that we're working as one team. And I think we just need to continue to do that. We just need to continue to do that in safety meetings, one-on-one meetings, round-table meetings. So I think the senior team and actually, management at all levels are really much, much more engaged. And I think that's what it's going to take. It's going to take, that trust that we believe we're all in the same one team, and we're all trying to make sure that everybody's going home safe. I was getting some feedback from the mic.
So, Director Barrett, I can give you a really recent example of what's gone on, and it comes from Fort Calhoun. As we went into the asbestos program in 2017, there was a lot of concern of employees about how are you ensuring that it's safe for me to be in this area outside of the enclosures. And, asbestos is not visible necessarily. It's really, the concern is more airborne. And those employees, in terms of the ones that do typical rounds for operations staff and security staff, had really concerns about this. And, we started posting, here's when we take air samples, here's what they are in the general area. And we found that even wasn't enough. So we did mandatory asbestos training. And so we got everybody trained, and even at the, so that was sort of in the first half of the year. In the latter half of the year, we continued to have these questions raised. And so what we did was we took the asbestos supervisor who's trained to do this work, and we had him do a series of, I think, 10 to 12 training sessions, and required all employees to go to that, where they could ask them specifically, what are you doing to ensure my safety? How is it that we are ensuring that the air sampling is being done? Can we see this on a more periodic basis? And so we've provided all that information to people. And so I think it's just continually assessing additional things that we can do to ensure people that we have their safety first and foremost in our mind, and then providing them with all the information that we have to show them. I mean, we went as far as to show them, here's what's in the regulation and here's how we're meeting it. And I think it's that kind of continuous attention that Mo was talking about. Not only do we have your back, but when you raise a question, it's a legitimate question and we need to respond appropriately.
I think another great example is we had an incident in one of our facilities where a railing became dislodged from the screws in the cement, right? And so, or in the wall area. And what we did was an assessment across all of our operations, including these buildings, to verify steps and railings across the whole district. And ladders were all appropriately connected, and so we required each of the senior team to do that within their business units and report back any findings. And so I would say historically that has not been done across this company before, and so we're seeing that issue. I think with Kevin being part of the senior team and reporting weekly on the status of safety activity and what we're doing, we're really elevating that conversation across the organization differently.
That's an interesting example. To what extent do we have a sense for whether an injury results from what I'll call human error versus a lack of good equipment or a railing that's fallen? I mean, do we have a sense for sort of?
Yeah, we do an investigation on each injury. Mm-hmm. And through the process of interviews and just walking down the job, is we usually determine what the cause was.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a split.
Okay.
It's rarely equipment itself. Mm-hmm. It's usually human error or just wrong process used.
Okay.
Maybe even wrong tool used.
Or
right?
tool.
Yeah. Wrong tool, wrong process. Or not using the appropriate tool that would prevent maybe a soft tissue injury in a shoulder, where you would use an automated or a motor-powered, whatever the equipment that we use to do a number of things that we do. So,
and that type of thing, workers' comp has always required that differentiate between human error
sure.
or environmental or equipment, what have you.
Yeah. So part of the reason I asked that question is I wanted to be sure that through our cost and process improvement efforts, we're not skimping on things that would potentially result in
I don't
that's
think,
fairly obvious, but
yeah,
I just
I
want
don't
to make
think
sure
we
that's
are at all. And we're making sure that is being communicated across. And actually, when we go to safety meetings or have those roundtable meetings, we don't have the supervisors or management in the room, so we have that direct line between us and the field people to make sure that if there is any issue, we're aware of it. I don't believe it.
Okay.
I don't believe that's an issue at all. But I really believe it's about that relationship that we're one team and we're listening to you. And if there is a change that we need to make, we're going to make it. Mm-hmm. We're going to make it in timely fashion, and we're going to communicate back that, hey, we're making the change, or we're not making the change, and here is why. But I do believe it's, even though the numbers do not support, I do believe we are on the right track and we're making a lot of progress.
Sure. Are we drug and alcohol testing all injuries?
Not all injuries.
How do we determine not to?
I'll refer it over to Mark.
I think it partly depends on, so if we have a vehicle accident, who's at fault is a piece of what we look at. The circumstances surrounding it are certainly something that our fitness for duty people evaluate. They do speak immediately with the supervisor that's involved with the incident to make that determination. But I know there are specific criteria that they go through with the supervisor to determine whether that's necessary or not.
Yeah, if we have a vehicle accident where someone's at a stop sign and someone rear ends them, we don't do that testing. But if we have an individual that hits somebody in an intersection, we would require that, obviously. And if we have some other observation that occurs in the field that would suggest we need to drug test, we would go ahead and do that.
We're also in the process of beefing up our fitness for duty a little bit. There's some new regulations down the line. And also OSHA's putting out some new regulations on when you can test and when you can't. So we're looking at all those, and then we'll fit it back into the fitness for duty program. But part of the monitoring aspects of SD6, it's continuous improvement and monitoring. And so in 2017, I called CPS Energy. They're out of San Antonio, Texas. The reason I called them is they probably have the best DART record. Actually, they do have the best DART record in the country. They have about 3,000 employees. They're a full-service utility. And so comparison, in 16, their DART rate was 0.28, and in 17, it was 0.25. And so much better than we are. And so I wanted to go down and take a look and find out what the silver bullet was. Is there a magic formula that they're using down at CPS? And what we found in that benchmarking is that we're doing all the right things. We have the right programs in place, right processes. We just got to change our culture a little bit. And it's not major changes, it's tweaks. And so we're doing that. For instance, they hold everybody accountable from the CEO down to the line worker. And we say we do that. However, what the difference is down there is if you show up, if Kevin McCormick would show up on a job site and I would see an employee without their PPE on, I would not only talk to the employee, I would talk to that crew leader overseeing that crew. And then I'd go up the chain of command. But they really hold their supervisors and crew leaders responsible to make sure their crews have everything they need for that job, the right resources, right tools, and they do it appropriately. We're not there yet. So we're going to work with labor management, work with the unions, and really beef up our crew leaders, give them training so they can do that out in the field for us. I think that'll be a big step forward. It also confirmed, I already mentioned this, that we're doing things good. So it was a great benchmarking trip, learned a lot. They also are not doing very well in their preventable vehicle incidents. And so they're relying on us to help them reduce their vehicle incident rate. So we're helping each other, and that's always nice. We also implemented good catches. Earlier we talked a little bit about near misses, but good catches are the golden nuggets. They're when you go out and look at a job, getting ready for it, doing the planning, and you go, this just doesn't look right. Something's out of place, something's wrong. And you identify that, and it gets up to the right look, your supervisor, manager, and we fix it before anything happens. We implemented that in October. We've had 114 to date reported, and I'm happy to say that we've had no DART cases since we implemented that. So in November and December, we didn't have a DART case. And I think there's a direct correlation between finding it before it happens and when you get to work. We're also developing a contractor safety program. We feel the people we bring on site should value safety the same way we do. That has not always been the case. We're working with supply chain to implement that. The other thing we implemented in 17 was a management observation program. So if you're a supervisor or above, you're required to go out in the field at least once a month, talk to the folks that are turning wrenches. And this year we had 786 of those. And then from the senior management team, we had 57 senior management members out in the field doing the same thing. And I'm getting a lot of great response out of the workers out in the field that they appreciate that, and there's a lot of good things that come from it. In 18, we're implementing a senior management DART improvement plan, and it really has two focuses. The first is setting clear expectations for the workers. And so, you know, it's as simple as wearing the right PPE, having the right tools for the job and using those tools, looking after each other out in the field, and so on. The other piece of that is psychological safety. Everybody in this company should feel comfortable to be able to step up and say, I got a concern. Like I said earlier, we have pockets where we didn't find that, and so it's really important that the senior management team sets that culture and we push it through the whole organization. We're going to implement the benchmarking findings of accountabilities to all level that we got out of CPS Energy. We're going to continue to do management observations. What we learned after looking at each one of those, that we still have a couple bean counters out there and not really getting true good information, so we're going to retrain some people that are doing those observations. We're going to continue pushing the good catches. Eventually, I want to be a true leader in the industry on good catches. We need to lead the way. We're going to implement the contractor safety program later this month. And the other big thing is quarterly safety reviews of senior management. These are deep dives. They go into everything that we find in the investigations. And my meetings with them is more about helping them look at the blind spots. My folks and other folks are out in the field every day, and so I'm trying to fill in those blind spots with senior management so they can go out and fix things. With that said, the Public Information Committee has reviewed and accepted this monitoring report for SD6, finds that OPPD has taken reasonable and appropriate measures to comply with board policy SD6.
Great, appreciate it.
I think it's easy to draw the conclusion that most of these, most of the opportunities for improvement, or maybe I'll say that differently. Most of the jobs wherein you're likely to experience an injury are in, you know, a linesman up in a bucket, whatever that might be. To what extent do we find that we're, any of our people who sit at a desk in a chair most of the day are experiencing any injuries, you know, from an ergonomics perspective, whether it's neck pain, wrist pain, all that kind of stuff.
So we do have a really good ergonomic program, and we're actually expanding it out to the crafts out in the field.
Okay.
And so as soon as they let us know, we go do a evaluation of their workstation and fix those. And we do that. The reason, you know, the big focus is the craft people,
Sure.
but we do have injuries.
Yep.
You know, people slip on the floor downstairs or trip over carpet or trip over a file. So that's why it's really important to do safety meetings regardless of you're a craft worker
Yeah.
or an office worker. And so we push those very hard.
Okay, and to Director Barrett's comment about the likelihood that people are going to be reporting those things, I could certainly see a scenario where if I was, you know, I sit at a desk most days, and I could envision a scenario where if I'm uncomfortable in my work setting, and if I'm developing shoulder, wrist pain, what have you, I'm going to be less likely to report that because, quite honestly, the guys out in the field, physically anyway, are working a little bit harder and more likely to, are experiencing higher risk. So to me, it's important that we continue to build that culture, both in terms of the people that are out in the field and those that are also at their desk every day. I mean, sitting is the new smoking, right? So there's certainly some risks that come along with that. Maybe not as acute, but certainly present.
Yeah, I would say that's a great conversation that we've had. I'll give you a recent example where obviously there's some skylight replacements that we were doing in the atrium area. We were doing some bathroom remodeling. And we had an observation from an employee that was raised up that we had folks stepping over the tape to go from point, the warning tape, the safety tape, stepping over it and doing what they needed to do to go through another door. And it was kind of like absolutely unacceptable, right? We would not accept that. We would not accept that in certainly a power plant. We wouldn't accept it in any of our other operations, and we're not going to accept it here in Energy Plaza. And so, you know, we raised that flag, and we asked that communication to be very clear. I think we did some things on story about, listen, we're going to identify who those folks are and treat them as if they violated a policy on safety. And so had that conversation, had those discussions with them, did a broad communication about, listen, you know, this is serious. The reason why that tape is there to keep you safe, because there may be particles that may fall during that work. And by the way, when there's a do not enter on a restroom door because folks are working in there, we would expect you not to enter, right? And so it's that simple, but it's that communication, and then we ask that the senior team cascade that throughout their organizations to make sure it was clear within each of their management kind of structures to communicate that down. So
also set context for public affairs. We're not out in the field, right? In regards, we're sitting at our desks. So how do you make that relevant? And then we report back that says we cascaded it down into the organization, and we report back up to senior management that says we had that conversation. Yeah.
So if I could give an example to get to what I think Director Moody's talking about out of personal experience. One of my employers required a doctor's say-so before getting a chair that was more suitable for a work environment. Well, I mean, it's a cost savings measure. Not everybody wants the good chair, right? So is that a tension that we have here? How does someone, are we evaluating the workplace environment and for the office workers as well?
I can give you another example. So one of my management observations was out at the Energy Control Center. Those people have 12-hour jobs where they sit. And so one of my primary questions was, how are your chairs? Because that's one of your tools. They had some concerns about some of the chairs they were using. They have had some back surgeries in that area. And so we've got a collaborative effort going right now between our ergonomic person and the facilities folks and me to make, and safety, to make sure that we're getting some chairs out there for them to try out. And we will purchase whatever chair they believe is the best and most comfortable for them that's also ergonomically correct. So cost is not an issue.
Sure.
We don't tell people they can't have a specific chair because it's too expensive. We let them make those choices.
So great answer. And then the question is on the back surgeries and that are related to this is, how does that tie back, or does it, to these measures?
Yeah, I don't, in those specific instances, I'm sure we did some evaluation of the cause of the back surgeries. We don't know that it was directly related to them sitting all of the time. But we do that evaluation as part of the workers' comp evaluation.
Doesn't that also coordinate with your wellness?
Yes.
Your wellness stuff, as far as, you know, the amount of, I know that there's little signs everywhere suggesting everyone take the steps. And do you have any type of place for these people to exercise or anything like that, or stretching or any type of classes?
People can stretch anywhere they are, and we do have materials that we send out about jobs that are sedentary and some stretching exercises that you can do periodically. So we send those out to people, yes.
Yeah.
We also offer classes. I just got the email, so.
Yeah, there's some classes though, right?
So this bleeds into best places to work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as far as the wellness and as far as having actually be nice to have an exercise room available, you know, I think, you know,
Well, in addition to what I appreciate is what I consider what seems to be a pretty good policy about ensuring that, you know, thinking about a chair as a tool.
Yes,
That's absolutely right. And, you know, sit-stand workstations, I know you've got one in your office now. Those are all things that, you know, I'm starting to see as more and more prevalent issues in an office setting, and people are When they're thinking about the kind of environment that they want to work in, the physical space that they spend 10 hours a day is really critical, both in terms of chairs, desks, natural light, and all those things.
Your original question was in terms of, we do have an ergonomic specialist here. And what we're finding is that sometimes people, when we offer, we'd like to do an assessment, an ergonomic assessment to see, do you need a sit-stand disc? What kind of chair do you need? We get some of the, that's more for the people out in the field. Don't spend time with me, I just need a chair that's better than what I have. But we really want to work with them, so we're working with Public Affairs to put out more information, reaching out differently, partnering with safety. So there really is a psychological piece to that, to your point. So we're doing a lot of work around that.
And we're also doing a workplace study for space planning for the organization. So
We're in the very early
there'll be some
phases of
interesting
that.
things come out of that.
So I really like the SD6, and it's a wonderful SD in fact in the terms that it has measures. It measures are driving action. I wish it's a challenge, of course, to get that for all of our SDs, and I do appreciate the work that you're planning to do on SD13 in that regard. What I hear out of this discussion is that SD6 is about an acute incident more than it is about chronic or repetitive. Do we have is there a need to have those measures woven into this, or is there some other way that we need to track that?
I would say this, I mean, I think, so this is the example that, yeah, we're identifying some of the acute related and in the DART, but we also demonstrate, as we showed here, those injuries that occur that may not be acute, we also track and we've shown in our safety incidents. I think what we do from that piece is, you know, you just can't focus on the acute, you've got to focus on all of that. Whether that's a measure or not, to me, is less of a concern today for us, and I think it'd be really difficult to get a tangible measure that identifies that. But let us think what that may look like and identify that as we kind of move forward with some of the other initiatives that we have here today.
Can I suggest, I think the one thing that I'm a little surprised isn't in here, the recordable incidents, the injuries that require first aid that don't result in time lost. We always reported those because it's like the near misses are a leading indicator of recordable incidents, which are a leading indicator of DART. So the time lost ones. I'm surprised we don't have a couple charts showing historical numbers of recordable incidents, because that would wrap in what Rick is talking about.
And we did show that here.
Yeah.
Okay. Bottom
I
chart.
must have missed
Yeah,
it.
yep, yep,
Oh, yeah, in a table.
yep.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Good. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Break.
All right, thank you. Thanks.
Break.
So,
Break.
yep, we're gonna do a break. I was just waiting for you guys to get all your questions in, to be honest with you, so, yeah.
So.
The process, that's what I was gonna do.
We've been reviewing whether or not we're in compliance with this, right?
Right.
And are we doing like full stop? And then do we need to discuss whether or not there are any revisions necessary
Yep,
to it?
that's exactly what I was
Okay.
gonna try to
All right.
bring up and say, no, that's what, the way I'm understanding it, that's what we're gonna do. So, this is our current policy. It's on the agenda though, actually, for Thursday, to say, here's where we're
Make the
at.
same ring.
If you got any ideas to change it, you can send it to the committee, right? And make any changes well, I absolutely need this done and it should go. That's when we need to talk about it right now. Is there anything absolute that needs to change here, or are we on the right direction? That's, I think, where we're going.
So we would approve the monitoring report from the past, right? And so then, yeah, any changes then would be generated and then sent to the committee for review, right?
You know, we've had previous safety reports. This is the most thorough we've had.
Yeah,
right.
This was nice that we can have data, you can,
Yeah.
you can get
Appreciate
data
that.
on this. A lot of SDs you can't, but this one you really can. It's a good solid.
Do any of the directors have a desire for this policy to go into into some kind of a committee discussion to discuss and entertain any potential changes. It would be helpful to understand what those changes, the magnitude of that change might be, to see if that's warranted and if there's some, kind of enough interest with the board to drive that discussion.
Yeah, so that is the question. Are we comfortable with where we're at?
Well, no, that's the question I asked.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I am.
My only suggested change was a comma that
Which we can do by
clarifies what dark
Thursday,
means.
if
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
the minor change. And I would take the definitions off and push them to the glossary that I need to
Yeah.
develop and send to you.
Yeah, so it's just housekeeping for me, that's it.
Yep.
Yeah, but in general, we're on the right path and we're going the right direction and then go from there. And again, it's nice everyone hears what's going on instead of just in that committee. Clean things up in committee, that's what those are for. So, sounds like we're good then. And then this is Thursday and hopefully we'll, knock on wood, have a safe year. So, okay, with that, then, yeah, we do.
Not
need to
knock
take-
on wood. No, we don't.
Oh, we don't do that. We
We
do.
don't accept that as a strategy.
Okay.
So hope is not a strategy. So
That's true.
Good
That's
point.
okay,
Good
so
point.
let's-
I like that.
Yeah.
yeah,
He takes it seriously.
we do. We really
So, it's 10:14 now. Let's just take a 15-minute break, be back at 10:30. You can go to your offices. That gives you a little enough time to do whatever we need to do. So we'll reconvene at 10:30. All right, thank you. So, all right, I think we're ready to roll. So we'll get started. Ann, you want to kind of walk us through system management?
See if you can disallow it.
Disney, I tried to find the current books.
You got
I knew
to-
which one to get
to
it.
be secure.
Go to agenda. Maybe I'll get that one. Okay. I want to go to systems management, and we're going to do the over 500 right now. And the first one on the over 500 is Kate Brown on janitorial services.
Yes, thank you, Director McGuire. This contract, 235228 for $1,126,847 with FBG Service is for janitorial services across the district. So this covers all our different buildings and the services we provide to them, with the exception of Fort Calhoun, which has a separate agreement because of how we have done the contracts. So this is basic janitorial services. I don't know what else you might want to know about it.
Kate, do you want to talk about the work that we did with Javier and his
Sure can.
supply team on this? I think this is another great example of some of the cost and process improvements.
Yeah, and a great partnership in that process. So, working with supply chain management, the building services group went through a great process to find a new group to work with in terms of our building services and janitorial services. And they went through a process that basically provided us $300,000 of cost savings per year on the contract, which is very large in terms of that. The process they went through required a lot of partnering, a lot of collaboration, and a lot of working with different vendors to get there, and they did a fabulous job of getting us to this point, so that's what this contract is.
So Kate, obviously there's pretty janitorial services, but 1.1 million, that's a lot of services and moving parts there.
It is.
So, when you're talking to this, did you limit it to somebody who could handle all of our, I mean, there's security too, as we leave papers around and clearing employees who come in your offices. And the question I'm getting at is you didn't piecemeal it out, you went with one big company, right?
That's our
That's the way to go,
preference.
and the reasoning for that was, instead of trying to find somebody in Syracuse, Nebraska, who's gonna come in at night to clean, what's your reasoning? I mean,
So the reason is when it can be more cost effective from an administrative side. It's also easier to manage. If we could not have found someone that could handle what we were trying to achieve, we would have gone to a piecemeal approach, because we would try to find someone that can do everything that you're describing. This company, the other great thing about FPG that we found is that they very much share the values that we have around the employee side in terms of how they care for their employees. That was a big piece in this. So to your point, Tim, we were fortunate that we found multiple companies that we could talk to that could service all those areas. But like I said, had we not, we clearly would have gone to breaking it up, because we could have managed that as well. But this was a win-win across the board
Yeah,
in terms of
that's
what
great.
we've been able to do. They're also working to see, in terms of the some of the current employees that we have that are working for us from the janitorial side, that are high performers, great employees for us, they're looking to hire those onto their organization, so they would stay with OPPD through that process.
Not our employees, but employees
Yeah,
of the
excuse me,
former
of the
company.
Yes, thank you.
Oh,
yes.
the
Now-
They are being given consideration by the new
Yeah,
company.
they know the nuances.
Yes,
of
they're
benefits
having those
and whatever.
conversations
Okay, yeah.
between them. Yes, thank you for
Who was the
clarifying, it's
former-
not our
Who was the
employees.
former company then?
Yes.
Who was doing it?
I'm sorry.
Who was doing it before?
Oh, I'm not gonna have the name off the top of my head, I can
But
get it
it's a
for
new
you.
vendor though.
Yeah.
We'll get
No,
that
right,
information.
Yeah, I can
that's
get
all-
that to you,
That's
too.
all right. You
So
don't-
300,000 annually
Yeah.
we're saving? And is this 1.1, is that
This
is
is
that
the
an
full
annual number?
contract.
That's the full contract for over how many years?
I believe this is a 3, let me validate that.
So that's a huge chunk of,
Let me validate that, Craig.
okay.
Yeah, let me
I
get
was
back
gonna
to
s-
you.
Yes, I was curious
'Cause I
about
feel like that's not-
generally how we were able to skin that much off of a significant contract.
We've made a lot of changes over the last few years through the costing process around how we're doing janitorial
Okay.
work. So that along with working with these different vendors around this is how we got those savings. But we've done a lot of different work to somewhat scale back how we were doing the janitorial services in our environment.
Okay, great.
But still maintaining
Right.
cleanliness.
Yeah.
So the contract, I imagine, is a performance kind of contract,
It
but was there some dialogue or discussion among environmental and the company on the materials that they're using?
There was, yes, and they are around the green side of materials that they are using. That was a piece in the process for all the folks we talked with, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, next is the contract for Energy Solutions LLC. This is an interesting source, because Energy Solutions is the contractor that we have that helps us with decommissioning. However, this has to do with a life of contract with Energy Solutions about 10 years ago, and I'm going to have Mary take it from there.
As you said, this is a life of plant contract that we have for the disposal of our radioactive waste at Fort Calhoun. This is the 2018 estimated amount that we expect to expend under this contract. The original contract was put together through a service that we were part of, an affiliation that we were part of called United Service Alliance. We've since dropped out of that as we went into decommissioning, but we're able to maintain this contract with Energy Solutions. The original contract was signed in 2007. We renew it about every 5 years, and so we look at, again, every 5 years, are we getting the correct or the best value for the contract? That's due to be looked at again in 2020, so we're kind of in the mid part of it. We also have a limit on the amount that we expend through here, at which point we can renegotiate as well. So there's 2 triggers. One is a date and one is a limit. It does escalate 3% per year, but in 2017, Energy Solutions did not escalate it at all. So we're getting great benefit out of this contract. So this is really just to provide services for low-level radioactive waste disposal for 2018.
And does this have to do with the amount? You know, does it escalate as far as the amount of radioactive waste disposal, since we are putting more out?
There are rates for the type of waste that we are sending to the disposal. So if it's Class A waste, it's one rate. If it's a dry activated waste, it's a different. So depending on the level of waste, there are rates, and then also the volumes. So we look at both of those as we send this off to.
And is this $2 million an estimate, or is it just, do you think it's going to be a fixed cost?
It is our current estimate based on what we intend to dispose of over 2018. If that goes up or down, this amount will change.
And I think there's only one other vendor that does this, is that correct?
This is the only vendor that provides DAW and Class A waste. There is a vendor that does Class B and Class C waste as well. And when we look to see if there are other vendors available every 5 years, as I said, we look to renew this contract.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, now we're coming back to the reporting item for Timberline Construction. If you remember, a couple months ago, we gave an action item to have Mo negotiate this without a closed bidding process, because we need to get this line in, and I'll have Mo take it from there.
Sure. Yeah, as you recall, back in June when we had the very severe storm, That was the worst transmission damage we've experienced in the life of the company. Our crews did a great job rebuilding most of the lines, but this is the very high voltage line, 345,000 volt line. So this is to rebuild that line. It's about 7 miles from 114th and Cornhusker all the way to the Flat River. And as Director McGuire said, we need to get that back in service before the summer peak. So this contract is to rebuild that line with timber line. Any questions?
Mo, have they started working?
I believe we are working on the project, and we have started. We've actually also last October we got this contract that we bought all the steel. So the work is progressing. We're doing very well, and we're hoping to complete that by April, May timeframe. We're replacing the wood pole with steel. I know somebody probably was wondering, and that ties to the resiliency to make sure our system is resilient, and also would help with the capacity of the line. So yeah, the work is progressing.
And no further easements or?
No,
It's
that's a
already
rebuild, the
existing
same,
space?
same route, so no issues there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. If no other questions, we're going to go on and have Mary Fisher discuss the next action item, which is the Nebraska City 1, Unit 1 finishing superheater materials. This is just for the materials and not for the manpower, for the installation.
Great, thank you. I have a couple pictures here that I thought I'd start off with. As we look at this picture, you see the red box there. That is the superheater section of the boiler, and it contains 37 tubes, 2 outlet headers, and 37 bottle headers that we are asking to be replaced. There was a inspection that was done in 2014 in a boiler outage that identified that we had 95 potential issues in these boiler tubes. Since that time, we've decided that this is replacement of these tubes is necessary. If you go to the next slide, please, Christy. So this gives you a picture of what that looks like. The header is at the top, the large pipe, and then these boiler tubes coming off of that header. Next. And then this just shows you the header, or excuse me, the boiler tubes coming in as they come in on a truck, and then one being lifted up and put into place. This is from our North Omaha 5 station. So, excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about the materials.
Mary, these tubes are almost 40 years old.
Yes, they were put in
original?
1979.
Wow.
So this is the last of the tubes to be replaced in the boiler.
That's long, a long life for.
It's quite good life.
Oh, yeah.
And what we're seeing is creep in the metal, so
Okay.
these really do need to be replaced.
That's not necessary. That's just.
That's moving for you.
We did go out for bid on this. We received 7 bids with 2 alternatives, so 9 options. We found 5 to be technically and legally responsive. As we've looked at those, we've evaluated them. What I would say is that we did not take the lowest bid. We took the second lowest bid. We did that specifically for 2 significant reasons. The lowest bid had the fabrication as well as the material being done in China. As we looked at that, we felt that we would need to have someone continually monitoring what was going on over in China as part of the fabrication, and that cut into the differential in the bids pretty significantly, about in half. So for that reason, as well as we were concerned about getting the tubes eventually through customs and into the U.S. as a tube, as a manufactured tube, and so in order to avoid that problem, we have selected the second lowest bid. So the material will be manufactured in China, be delivered to South Carolina, and then fabricated in South Carolina, where we have better control and better oversight of the fabrication for these tubes.
Mary, can you talk a little bit more about what that oversight entails on our part? Is that people present and on site on a regular basis? What does that look like?
Sure, and I might refer to Jeff Karloff, who I've asked here to be today, but my understanding of that is that we'll periodically go out as part of the fabrication, look at specific steps in the fabrication to ensure the fabrication is going. We'll also look at the quality materials that they do, so if they do liquid penetration on welds, those sorts of things, we'll evaluate those as well. Jeff, do you have anything else to add?
Okay, thank you.
Mary, how much of the work is done by our own people? How are we involved in that process?
So we're involved in the oversight in terms of looking at the quality of the fabrication that goes on in South Carolina, as well as the inspection when the material comes in. So we'll look at both of those things. We'll also, later over the summer of 2018, come back to you with a fabrication contract. And at that time, we'll determine how much of the work will be done internally versus how much of the work will be done by an external contractor.
Okay.
So that's later to come.
And how long does this process take? How long will we shut down Nebraska City 1?
We're planning on a 44-day outage.
That's
will
pretty quick.
Include this.
This is in
yeah.
18.
But remember, most of it's
19,
already
it just
fabricated
takes a
and ready
while.
to go in, and
Yeah.
so it's part of a 44-day outage on Nebraska City 1.
And what time of year?
I don't remember when that
March.
is next year.
Winter.
But next year in 2019.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
And you've done a cost-benefit analysis, the team has done that on this?
We do cost-benefit analysis on all our major upgrades to equipment. That cost-benefit analysis showed a payback at 20 years, a positive net present value in 20 years. So that was the basis for the decision moving forward.
And what about new source review? If you can, I'm sure you've probably looked at that also.
We do look at that as part of this. This is a like-for-like component, and so we're installing like-for-like, which takes us out of the realm of new source review. Part of what we'll do also is to make sure we do all the calculations and all the analysis to show that should there be any questions after the fact or anything, we'll have all of that paperwork in place. Jeff, do you have anything else?
Okay.
Mary, how are these tubes coated so that they'll last another 30 or 40 years?
I don't know. Jeff, do you know?
There's no coating, it's just they get the tube in and they bend it to the shape you saw, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of raw steel.
Right, yeah, there's no coating, it's just straight up. I think this is like a chrome long steel, there's some chrome aluminum steel, and there's also some stainless steel. There's no corrosion or anything, it's just straight up.
And it operates at about 800 degrees, and so it's, manufactured for that.
That surprises me.
There's no other questions.
Well, I've got a question.
Okay.
So when you
Sorry.
did the cost-benefit analysis and you assume a payback of 20 years, that raises the question of, looking forward 20 years, was there also an evaluation of alternatives?
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of the integrated resource plan as we look at alternatives for what needs to be built or maintained on the system. And so this is consistent with our IRP that we had done last year.
Okay. I'm having trouble formulating another question, the follow-up question.
Isn't this kind of a stay-in-business kind of a investment?
It is.
I mean, if you don't do it, the unit's down.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so-
And
At
what really,
what
it's-
time?
it's- what you don't do it is you start to see tube failures. And as you see those tube failures, they get progressively worse. And as they get progressively worse, it takes the unit down. You have to go in for an outage. You have to either go in and plug or repair those tubes on an individual basis, which is really cost prohibitive. And so it really is avoiding the maintenance cost is the trade-off
Sure.
that we have by replacing this. And as I said, there were over 95 indications, some as small as a quarter of an inch deep, some as large as an inch deep. So we're seeing the degradation of the material that's requiring us to do this.
This is an important part of it. Production.
Maintaining a unit.
I mean, yeah, this is, I know that, well, what's gonna happen in 20 years, I don't know, but we're still gotta operate in this environment we're in, looking forward to that future. I think, is that where you're getting at?
Yeah.
But yeah,
It-
and safety too, I would assume, is probably
it
some of
really-
those issues and these
yeah.
things, so.
It really helps support our availability factor, which is
Right.
part of what we're
Yeah.
looking at and part of what you're holding us accountable for. And so for us to maintain availability and to be reliable, it's necessary that we take this step.
And also delivery on contracts. Nebraska City, I don't know if we own it, but we have contracts with LES
That's
and other
NC2.
ones.
This
Oh,
is
that's
NC2.
two, okay.
NC1, we own and operate. Actually,
Okay.
NC2, we own and operate. So,
Yeah.
If we were looking at making an investment to the tune of $300 to $400 million on a unit that is worth about that much, then it would require a more robust analysis and probably a board discussion of what, are we going to have a stranded asset? This is less than 1% of the value of the unit. It's something that it's required to maintain the unit, as Director Trinan said, to keep it going. And therefore, we still do a business analysis. We have a business case. It has a positive return on investment, has a payback of 20 years, but it is something that didn't require that long-term strategic discussion based on the magnitude of the investment.
Yeah,
compared
that's
to the
brilliant.
unit.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
and just to give you an example of the benefit, I mean, if we didn't do this, we would be spending $300 to $400 million to replace that capacity that we would be required to replace as part of our capacity requirements. And I can tell you, in the last 30 days, that plant was up and operating with market prices that were significantly high during the cold weather. I mean, in the $100 a megawatt range on certain times during the day. And that's why the availability factor is critical for us.
Low-cost generation available for us is important.
Louder, please.
Having that low-cost generation is important to us on the system when we hit days where, prices are up upwards of $100.
Yep.
That's good context to put it in, though, Javier, on percentage of
And
value.
certain investments like this, you really just can't justify standing by themselves. They're just required to stay operational. They just are. That's why a 20-year payback doesn't bother me, because otherwise you're out of business. So,
Ballpark and installation costs?
About $4 million. So the total project's about $8.4 million.
No other questions, we go on to the next board action item, the interlocal cooperation agreement with Kate.
Thank you, Director McGuire. So, over the last few months, 8 months or so, you've received updates about the shared radio system in terms of what we've been working on in terms of an amended and restated agreement. David Wizenand is here to talk about the Orion interlocal agreement in terms of where we are at and giving some history and some context around this topic for you all, so you all have some view into it. I do want to say this has been a wonderful piece of work that's been done by the district with these different counties, as you'll see, in terms of working together to come to a greater good for all the communities that are served by all these folks. So David's going to walk you through all this. Please ask questions.
And David is new to the company?
David is not. David's going to intro himself, but he's not new.
He's not that new?
He's not that new. He will talk
So-
about himself.
So I've been with OPPD since 2002.
Oh, boy, how come
And-
I've never met him before?
I've been in my current role since
I apologize,
June of 16.
Dave.
I'm sorry.
You're taking a bigger role, that's for sure.
Well, thank
So
you.
this slide deck isn't in diligent?
It should be under the Orion.
It should
It's
be.
not.
It's not there.
Nope, it's not.
Oh, okay.
All right,
We'll get it added.
you bet you will. I know.
Right now.
Okay. All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, so throughout a significant portion of 2017, Orion, which stands for the Omaha Regional Interoperability Network, has been working together to improve our structure and our overall governance and how we operate. I'm going to walk us through a high-level overview of the shared radio system, and as well as potential changes to the interlocal agreement, or proposed changes to the interlocal agreement. At a high level, Orion's a group of agencies who participate in the shared use of a common land mobile radio system, which supports critical communications of each of those agencies. And to ensure our focus is aligned, Orion operates with a guiding principle of we do what's best for the community. The originating agencies were OPPD in Douglas County in 2004, who are both facing end-of-life scenarios with their existing radio systems. Evaluations of current market systems revealed a high entry costs and ongoing maintenance costs, which led these two agencies, OPPD and Douglas County, to explore an interlocal agreement to share a single radio system platform instead of building their own discrete systems. Over time, additional agencies were brought onto the system, which I'll highlight in the next slide. Today, the primary agencies are OPPD, Douglas, Pottawatomie County in Iowa, and Washington County in Nebraska. The radio system is a critical service for OPPD in the realm of field communications, corporate security, safety, and compliance, and also for the county agencies with respect to public safety and public service centered around 911, police, fire, and rescue. This is a timeline of the events and kind of major milestones that have led up to this point. In 2003, OPPD issued an RFI for exploration of costs and capabilities of a system to replace their existing platform. In 2004, OPPD and Douglas officially entered into an interlocal agreement where they shared on a common platform. As part of that arrangement, OPPD hosted the master core, which is kind of the central logic and brains of the system, at an OPPD facility. And OPPD also performed systems maintenance and administration of the infrastructure. In 2006, Washington joined Orion in a separate interlocal agreement. And then moving forward to 2010, Pottawatomie County joined Orion in a separate interlocal agreement as well. Most recently, the city of Fremont joined the radio system, and they're a sponsored user of Washington County. As mentioned, we're looking to improve our structure and governance and provide clarity, and we intend to do that by amending and restating all of the agreements that are in place today into a single agreement. There are numerous mutual benefits that exist, and a long-term partnership is best for our communities and our customer owners. In terms of initial and ongoing costs, we share them instead of bearing them individually. We share in the resources in terms of people, skills, and knowledge. And then interoperability kind of allows for continuity of service, system resiliency and shared infrastructure, and kind of operational availability. Sorry if you can't see that all the way in the back. This is a high-level system map. This is just a depiction of the OPPD coverage area in the purple shading. As you can see, there's 11 radio sites that we have shown by the red triangles. In some areas, we're not fully shaded, and that's where the benefit of additional coverage from other agencies comes into play. Where OPPD may be marginal, we will roam onto another agency system and provide continuity of service. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what's changing. As mentioned, work began in 2017. Really took a look at how we were operating as a group. During this time, we recognized we were operating with more formality than the existing agreements prescribed, and we had an opportunity to consolidate several interlocal agreements into a single. This agreement will allow Orion to improve our governance processes in terms of how we operate and make decisions. It'll ensure clarity of roles and responsibilities, establish a set of operating guidelines that help to guide the technical work that's performed, and lastly, restructuring positions Orion for expansion in terms of new membership or potential mergers in the future. So focusing what's changing in terms of responsibilities. Systems administration will transition from OPPD to Douglas County. Systems maintenance will transition from OPPD to the county agencies, and they'll bear that responsibility. This will allow OPPD to consider our limited resources and maximize our investments so that we can focus on our core business, our technology initiatives, and more clearly focus on supporting our organization. Relocation of the systems master core will occur from OPPD to Douglas County as well. And then here are the next steps. So Douglas, Pott, and Washington are seeking respective board approval today as well. Douglas County will assume the role of systems administrator if the agreements are signed or when the agreements are signed. And Douglas County, county agencies will begin the maintenance responsibility also in Q1 of 18. And then no sooner than Q4, the relocation of the master core will be moved from OPPD to Douglas County facility.
Are there financial implications in all this? Are we gonna spend more money, less money? What's gonna happen?
So there are minor revenue and liabilities that are associated with this, and we can follow up on the exact details of those.
Well, I mean, I think it's a great idea. I'm all for it. I just want to know if there's an impact to us, negative or positive.
Pretty much a netting out.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not taking us too far in one direction or another if you look at it in a holistic way. But if you want to see the particulars behind that, but it's really a net in the end.
So the financial liability, I don't think there's a big change.
Okay.
The way I see the change here is the legal liability. If we're maintaining the master and maintaining the administration and it goes down,
Yeah.
it's not only our function, but it's the 911 functions for the
Yeah.
other counties.
I'd like to move that sooner rather than later. I agree.
Right.
I think when we originally did this back when, I think if some of the board members may remember, Larry Caesar came to the board and we did this interlocal agreement when we did this. It was really Douglas County's emergency management group, or 911 group that wanted OPPD to house it in our secure, in one of our secure areas. And so that was an opportunity for us to, save about $1.5 million in a variety of operating costs and be able to do that. Now with the changes kind of going on, it's now kind of our opportunity to relocate that and to move some of that responsibility to the appropriate agency. They were not set up to do it at that time. They are now set up to do that, and I think we have a good, solid feeling that they have the capability to do that based on our assessment.
So with this move,
I think this process has been really good because we got our teeth into this as a group and grew Orion to where it is today, really. And that was a very good process. To Tim's point, some things weren't in play. We had some things that they needed. We had some things that were helpful to us to the point of the coverage and such. So that was all really good. I think this is a natural evolution. And now we're to a point where we're saying, okay, to Tim's point, we can put this over here. We can create agreements that create a better understanding based on what we've learned over all these years and move from this point forward, also with the eye towards, hey, we can now merge with other folks into the future, and we have a solid roadmap. So this was all really good from start to finish. This has been, I think, an incredible process that we all went through together, and I'm sorry I interrupted someone over here.
no, I'm curious about the risk. Does moving this equipment and the responsibility somewhere else increase our risk of the system failure, repairs, whatever it might be, security?
No. Do you want to
No,
weigh in
so
here, David?
the target location for it meets our hardening standards for buildings. And then in terms of managing the migration from where it is today, that'll be an outsourced process through a vendor that has experience doing this for other utilities and other agencies.
Are there security issues that we think about every day as an industry?
Of the cyber nature?
Yeah, absolutely.
There are, and there are also mitigations in place on the existing platform, for
Okay,
sure.
so Douglas County will assume responsibility for operations, and and administration. And we're okay handing that off. Okay.
That was the key element in the operating guidelines that were built. So over the past 15 years or so, 14 years or so, we've developed what does it look like to maintain a system like this, and we fortified those operating guidelines. And so that really directs the technology and how we operate the system from a technical standpoint.
Okay.
And Nick, to that point, I would go back to what Javier was saying from a liability with the 911 system in play.
Absolutely.
It is better housed in their realm. Ours is very important to us, that radio system, but when you get into the 911 world, different realm, and that's best for them to take on.
And
But that's
a
a
big,
really good point.
that's a big discussion on the state level, and that's the whole idea of the merger. You know, hopefully in the near future, the entire state of Nebraska and perhaps more of Iowa will be able to.
Right, and this was our
merge.
way of maturing what we've done, so at such point where that makes good sense, we come together, that we're all in a state that it makes sense, and we can work it through this process. So this was all with that line of sight at some point.
Is this something the Public Service Commission has oversight of?
It does not.
No?
Which
Okay.
interesting, yeah.
What are the negative implications if the system goes down for us?
Can you talk to that, David?
So we lose a little bit of the rich features that are part of it, but we don't lose primary connectivity to our field crews.
By rich features, can you give me a couple
Just
examples?
so there would be probably a more technical answer that I'm not prepared to give, but in terms of primary communications and being able to communicate with our field crews, that still remains.
That still remains,
Right.
okay. All right.
Hey, David, is this a 911 system, or is this a daily communication with the fields, people out in the field throughout the district?
It's the land mobile radio system, right? So it's the mobiles that are installed in emergency vehicles and OPPD fleet vehicles. It's also
Okay.
the portable handheld devices that
Yep.
you'll see folks walking around with.
Used on a daily basis,
Used on a daily
regardless if it's
basis.
a tornado or, okay.
Right.
I heard you say that this allows us to focus more on our core duties. Does this mean we free up some personnel time and can redirect that?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Probably speeds up the response from an outage, I presume, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
It probably speeds up the response time, I presume, to different outages and so forth, I guess.
So how, so you look at something like this, it grew over time in terms of how we were doing it. So we were using more and more of our time towards this process in terms of what we were doing without adding people per se. There are things we need to work on in terms of our own system, so we were juggling this. So now we're handing that over, so it doesn't necessarily reduce the numbers of people that we need. It allows us to focus on the things more that OPPD needs to do in that regard. We were juggling and balancing
Right.
everything that we needed to do, so it's not to the point where, no, now we need less people, so to speak. I think that's where you were
Just
going.
one less ball to
Well,
juggle.
kind of, but you
potentially,
answered, yeah.
yeah.
We're covered.
Yeah,
Sorry, someone said something.
yeah, I'm sorry.
It was color commentary, it's not.
It's all I think both Kate and David have done a great job of working with the variety of counties and even have the ongoing conversation with the state. But us coming to kind of one common agreement really allows the opportunity to continually look for ways to increase the interoperability across potentially the state, as Director McGuire suggested. We may not be there yet, but this is the good first step to allow that to occur.
Yeah. It's, these interlocals are tough. So you require a lot of patience, that's for sure. That's a good thing.
David has done an incredible job of working with these and providing great leadership to that group in terms of this. I mean, this is a labor of love for everyone involved, but to your point, the counties are interesting. I liked working with them.
Hey, Kate, one last question. Why isn't Saunders County involved in this? Or Sarpy, sorry, Sarpy.
So in terms of this particular interlocal agreement, they weren't included as part of this, but we have been in discussions with them to determine feasibility of them coming onto the Orion system, but nothing's been formalized or determined
Okay,
yet.
that's
But
just
we are
correct.
in discussions.
So, to that end, though, what we were trying to avoid was bringing new folks in the mix as we rework this, because that would create a longer time frame to do this. So we said, let's get this all sorted out. We were very intentional about that when we came into this. Let's sort it all out and then look to these other folks, whoever they might be, that want to be merged or joined, or however you want to look at that.
Just a little history on that. Sarpy County they did the 800 system way earlier than Douglas County and some others, not way earlier, but 3 to 5 years earlier. So they had already had this, and then the others had to go buy this integration or whatever. So they're just a little late, but I know there's talks have been going on, but that's why. They already had it in place before everyone else.
I assume that there's a cost-sharing agreement as part of this, so the more the merrier.
It is, yes,
Okay.
it very much is part of it.
Okay.
think that's it for systems for me. If you wanna. Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
David, and I'm very sorry that I didn't recognize you.
Good job, thanks. All right, I think that's it for system management, as far as I can see. And then we're on governance, Director Mines, we have a lot of, I think it's all closed session.
It's all
isn't it?
closed session, so is it all right if I move?
Yeah, let's, well, we're gonna go closed session on some personnel, litigation, and what else, and cybersecurity. So we'll ask, go ahead, Craig.
Is the perk update after closed session?
No.
No, okay, good catch. All right. I didn't see the FERC update on it.
Or, no, I'm sorry, it's for the committee meeting in public.
Oh, okay, sit
Oh.
tight then. I'd missed that one.
Oh, when is that? I
It's
didn't
on
see it.
I don't see it on my.
Second page.
Oh,
Oh, I
I didn't see
didn't know
that.
we had a page two, all right.
Oh,
There is
that's
one
correct.
thing. Good catch.
I am a stickler for details.
Good,
Yeah,
good
just
catch.
Mr. Ferk.
Okay. All right, Steve.
I'm gonna get, if it's.
We're gonna hear from you.
I think many of you know that from time to time, we will present what I guess I would call an educational item on areas that impact the Omaha Public Power District, impacts the Board of Directors. And this is in that vein. It's a very general overview of how OPPD interacts with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. This is one of those regulatory areas that's full of acronyms. I'll do my best to define them as we go through. And please stop me as you have questions as I go through this. As I said, it's very general, and you may have some specific questions, and I'm happy to answer those. These are the topics that I will cover, and again, they'll be fairly brief. First of all, what is the Commission and what does it regulate? How does FERC impact the Omaha Public Power District? What is our relationship? That is, what is the relationship between FERC and the Southwest Power Pool? I will touch briefly on the relationship between the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC. However, the whole NERC concept is one that I know that you've heard about before and are familiar with. That's going to be the topic of a more detailed presentation, I think, later on, probably this quarter. And Mo and his group and Joe Lang will go into that in more detail. And finally, I'm going to touch on a few recent FERC proceedings that OPPD has been involved in. We're involved in monitoring many of them, but I wanted to highlight a few just so you have some idea of what we get involved in from time to time. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is an independent federal agency, meaning that it is represented by 5 commissioners appointed by the President, confirmed by the United States Senate, and no more than 3 commissioners can be from any one political party. The commissioners serve 5-year terms. Much of what FERC does is quasi-judicial, so they're independent in that sense as well, with appeals of their decision-making going up to the federal courts of appeal, and in some cases up to the United States Supreme Court. Each commissioner has an equal vote. I will say that the chairman has a governance authority for the commission, so has a little bit more power, if you will, in the sense of setting agendas and so on, but they each have an independent equal vote on all matters. You'll see all of the commissioners there pictured, and one thing that will immediately jump out at you is the dates of 4 of them. You'll see that 4 of the 5 commissioners took office within the last year, in August and November of 2017. And you may know that just from general information in the media, but that's a very unusual situation. Now, there's a pretty good level of experience in terms of background for these commissioners. Chairman McIntyre worked for probably 30 years with the Jones Day law firm, an international, very large international law firm where he practiced in the energy field, so he's got a great deal of experience. Neil Chatterjee came from Senator McConnell's staff. He was the energy chief for McConnell's staff. Just to give you an example, Mr. Paulson is from the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, so there's good experience there, which I think is helpful for the type of work that they do. So what does FERC regulate? FERC regulates in a number of areas, as you can see up on the screen. For our purposes, we're focused on FERC's regulation of the electric transmission and wholesale electric rates and services. under the authority of the Federal Power Act. Now, the Federal Power Act was enacted a long time ago in 1920, but it has been amended numerous times over the years, most recently by the Energy Policy Act of 2005, which notably added a number of incentives that are very prominent in OPPD's growth in the renewable energy business. Yeah, that's where a lot of the production tax credit legislation came from, just to give you a frame of reference. FERC also regulates hydroelectric dam licensing and safety under the Federal Power Act. That's not directly relevant to us, but it is to some of our public power brethren. If you know Lake McConaughey, the Kingsley Dam is a FERC-regulated hydroelectric dam with NPPD in the Central Nebraska Public Power District. And then indirectly, OPPD is impacted by a very broad regulation in the natural gas area under the Federal Natural Gas Act because, of course, we obtain a great deal of natural gas from interstate gas pipelines. FERC also regulates oil pipelines under the Interstate Commerce Act. So let's turn to electric service because that's what most affects us. This gets interesting. FERC primarily regulates public utilities, and you see I have that term in quotes. It's a term of art from the statute, and you're thinking to yourself, well, we're a public utility, and we certainly are. But that term, so you know, as it's used in the Federal Power Act, refers to someone other than us. It refers primarily to what you'll hear us refer to as investor-owned utilities. They are very broadly subject to FERC regulation. Public power entities, or non-jurisdictional entities, as they're often referred to in the FERC world, are not regulated by FERC generally, but only in certain areas, and I'll touch on a couple of those areas as I go through this presentation. Now, the Southwest Power Pool, you'll see from the slide, is a public utility, just like the investor-owned utility. So what does that mean? It's going to be obvious to you that because we're a member of Southwest Power Pool, OPPD is indirectly regulated by FERC by virtue of SPP's regulation by the Commission. Very importantly, FERC cannot regulate OPPD's rates and terms and conditions of service. They do for the so-called public utilities, but not for OPPD. Now, OPPD's transmission rate is a part of the SPP tariff, so indirectly, again, there is a regulation of FERC of that portion of the tariff that involves OPPD's transmission system, but it's only indirect, and FERC cannot directly regulate OPPD's rates and terms and conditions of sale. But FERC does have exclusive jurisdiction over those two areas that you see on the slide, the transmission of electric energy in interstate commerce and the sale of electric energy at wholesale, not retail, wholesale in interstate commerce. There's no authority for the Commission over local distribution or retail sales at all, and no authority over the siting of electric generation facilities. This is the type of work that FERC practitioners get involved in, and so I'll touch on it very briefly and not spend a lot of time on it, but I think it's important that you know. So if you hear somebody talk about an FPA Section 205 proceeding, that is a proceeding at FERC by which a public utility, again, not us, but a public utility, including SPP, must obtain approval of its rates, terms, and conditions of service. The way that works is they make a filing, please approve our rates, our transmission rate. And interested parties, like OPPD or any other interested party, can then intervene in a fairly short period of time, typically about 21 days, and be a participant or a party in that proceeding. And we do that from time to time. For example, if SPP on our behalf is filing for approval or updating of our transmission rate template, well, certainly OPPD is going to monitor that and be involved in it. And it's a fairly simple, straightforward, electronic process to intervene, and we do that. FERC has the authority to find the filing deficient, to accept it and allow the rates to go into effect, to suspend the rates for a period of time to examine them, or to set them for hearing. And whenever there's a hearing before FERC, FERC has a core of highly trained, experienced administrative law judges who handle those cases. Yes, Chairman.
So on setting rates, here in Nebraska we have it's different. We set the rates here.
That's right.
We're all public power. But you go to a state where they have a public power and you've got private generation or multiple, they don't go to the state regulators, state public utilities?
They go to the
Commission, or
state
is it
regulators
both?
for their retail rates, but their transmission rates, and their
okay.
transportation rates are governed by
So the
by
federal
FERC, and I should have been
interstate
clear on that.
highway, let's say.
Correct.
You gotta pay
So,
to
so
get
remember,
on
it's only interstate transmission
Oh,
service and
right.
wholesale transmission of electric energy in interstate commerce. So
So-
any intrastate, their service territory rates, for example, Mid-American's rates would be governed by the Iowa Utilities Board.
Okay, one more question then. So if you're paying those rates, I mean, that still goes down ultimately to the rate, the consumer, right?
Right, that's
You
right.
gotta build it into your prices.
Correct.
So they have some say over what the homeowners or businesses' rates are gonna be. If you had to pay a lot more, basically, for that, you
That's
gotta
right.
charge somebody. So they are engaged like this then with the rates.
It would certainly
So-
be a part of the entire cost of delivering energy. These days, most of the transmission service, as I think you know, is handled, at least in the eastern part of the United States, through regional transmission organizations like SPP. So in Iowa, it would be the Midwest Independent System Operator, or MISO. So that's where your transmission is handled, and actually your integrated energy market is handled as well. So.
The only caveat there, that depends on the cost of service model too. So not all costs would immediately be shifted now to ratepayers, depending on which costs you're talking about. Some of them may be shifted to ratepayers, some of them may be shifted to investors. So if they're not allowed to recover certain costs, investors of those investor utilities may have to pay for that. So it's not it doesn't immediately go to ratepayers. I think it's a subtle difference, but an important one.
Yeah, well,
The revenue
the only
requirement is
reason
not
I
all
ask,
the
I'm
same.
trying to understand because we're so unique, but you need to understand how everyone else around the world does this,
Yep.
at least in the United States. But sometimes we take for granted, oh, here's what it is, but, so you have to pay attention to these things, obviously,
Absolutely.
with all your others. So I'm just trying to understand that for my own.
All right.
That's exactly why we are deeply engaged in SPP and their involvement in FERC relative proceedings to make sure we have the best interest of our customers. And Nebraska has a representative from the Power Review Board that sits on the governance body of SPP to make sure, from a Nebraska perspective, the interests of Nebraskans are taken into consideration as well.
And really, to take that's a great point, Tim. To take that point just a little bit further, back when OPPD was considering joining a regional transmission organization, we were in a unique position. We could have looked and gone with MISO very clearly, and also SPP. And one of the factors, not the only factor, but one of the factors was that SPP, in contrast to MISO, is a much more member-driven organization with a lot of interaction at the committee level, as Tim was referring to, and that seemed to fit us and our public power model a little bit better, among other factors that were considered at that time. The next type of proceeding that you'll see at FERC, as you see on the board, is a Section 206 proceeding, and that's a complaint by either the commission or another party saying that your rates or term or condition of your service is not meeting the relevant legal standard. And again, same process, a party like OPPD, an interested party, can intervene in those proceedings. There is a proceeding pending right now that has some impact on OPPD. I'll touch on it at the end, but it involves whether the question of whether public power entities or non-jurisdictional entities like OPPD and other types of municipal or public power entities should be required to refund to customers when FERC determines that a rate is not proper. And I'll touch on that in a minute and why that's important to the jurisdiction of this particular board and any other board that sets rates for public power utilities. Then the legal standard that you see there is important, and it's something you'll recognize. The words are a little bit different, but it's very close to the same legal standard that this board utilizes when it sets rates. Fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory is the standard under Nebraska law, right? You'll see there it's just and reasonable. That's pretty close. And then the phrase unduly discriminatory or preferential. Just and reasonable means, generally speaking, that a rate is cost justified or market justified, very similar to the approach that OPPD takes. Unduly discriminatory or preferential, obviously there's a ton of case law around this, but I think I would reduce it to kind of this, from a common sense standpoint. Differences in rates are acceptable, but there has to be a business reason for them. There has to be a cost-based reason. It's more expensive to serve this type of customer, or this customer has such a large load that there are economies of scale that justify a difference in rates. That's what it means to be unduly discriminatory or preferential as a common sense basis. You'll also see the last point there is that FERC regulates, and this has had major impact on our industry through the use of rulemaking proceedings. And a couple of those are worth highlighting. You probably have heard, some of you may have heard of them. Order number 888, 888A. It's a very famous rule that opened up the transmission system to open access for all. Believe it or not, prior to the late 1990s, the systems weren't open in that sense, and you had to have bilateral agreements in order to move energy. The goal that FERC was trying to achieve was to eliminate undue discrimination and preference by the incumbent utilities on the use of their transmission system. Now, OPPD initially was not subject to this rule. Non-jurisdictional utilities were not covered, but were given an opportunity to play with everyone else through the use of reciprocity open access transmission tariffs, as you'll see on the slide. And that provided a safe harbor, meaning that the non-public utility, us, OPPD, would be entitled to use the transmission service of other utilities, and they could come and use our system as well. OPPD moved very quickly and was one of the first, if not the first, I think maybe the second, non-jurisdictional utility to file a reciprocity tariff with FERC so we could play on that level, and we utilized that really up until the time that OPPD went into the Southwest Power Pool. So it's not quite as relevant today, but the same principle governs what we do in Southwest Power Pool. Order number 890 and the follow-on 890A establish coordinated, open, and transparent transmission planning within regions and across regions. OPPD does most of that today through the Southwest Power Pool, as you might expect. FERC Authority and the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, as I mentioned, we're going to have much more information on that in a couple of months. But in 2005, relatively recently, Congress gave FERC authority over grid reliability. Prior to that time, there were reliability standards that had been in place for a good long period of time, but it was done on more of an industry basis. OPPD participated with the Mid-American Power Pool, MAP, and that's where the reliability standards were established and enforced. This gave those standards the force of law. FERC has certified NERC to develop those reliability standards. Those standards are approved and have been approved by FERC. And then NERC is divided into regions. You may have heard of the region that OPPD is part of, Midwest Reliability Organization. That's the group that comes in and evaluates in a very rigorous process OPPD's compliance with the reliability standards. And MRO has the authority to levy penalties. Those penalties are subject to FERC review, and FERC has independent authority to pursue compliance action. The numbers are pretty significant if there's a violation, into the multi-million dollars for really serious violations of reliability standards. So it's a very real and a very important form of enforcement.
So significance in terms of size, what about the frequency of those actions?
More frequent all the time, actually. Yes, I would say that there are always, I'm reading on a weekly basis about something that's going on at FERC in that area. So yes, I think there's strong enforcement. OPPD, again, I'm not going to knock on wood because that's been banned in the company, but OPPD has had a very rigorous process and has managed to keep itself in very strong compliance with NERC and SIP standards over time.
They're in line with what we would be using in terms of measuring reliability of our system as well?
Oh, absolutely. And we have
actually,
we participate in developing those standards and not just us, every utility. So those are done
on a consistent basis, as, yeah, definitely they align with what we do.
And it's kind of that next level down. So if we have a standard on maintenance of or inspection of switchgear or substation transformers or substation breakers, they'll look at, are you meeting your standards of breaker maintenance and inspections and all those kinds of things. So they step down to that operating piece.
And they cover engineering,
Exactly.
operation, maintenance. I mean, they cover just about everything in the way we operate and maintain our system and design our system. And to what Steve was saying, I mean, those the compliance issues are very huge, and there are some other utilities, without mentioning names, that they've been hit with a very heavy penalty, and OPPD has managed to do a really good job that we haven't had any penalties, and we're fully compliant. So. We have every 3 years, they come over here and they spend at least a week reviewing everything that we do, and prior to that, for at least a couple of months, we provide a lot of documentations that they review there before they come here. And then we have a self-audit every year we do. And then in addition to the self-audit that we do every year, and they come every 3 years, we also participate in other audits for other utilities to make sure that, we're learning and we're improving in what we do. So it's a very rigorous process. And again, to Tim's point, we have, dozens of OPPD employees that are involved in a lot of committees and a lot of standard developments and, nationwide, so.
So from a board standpoint, coming back to the reliability standards, really, for us, I would assume it rolls back up into the SAIDI, right? Is that, I'm trying to remember what our
Yes,
SD is, and
SAIDI.
what the key metrics that we're using. The SAIDI's the
SAIDI is
bigger one, I would assume.
Right, SAIDI is a little more focused on the distribution system and on the customer.
right.
And we have other metrics that we have in place, many other metrics that we look at, but they all kind of, they all connect together and they impact one another,
Sure.
so.
But FERC is really at that.
Very high.
Yeah, that's right.
Substation transmission level.
Yeah,
Generation
FERC,
level.
they're very high voltage level.
So you give an
correct.
example of the two penalties, one in the East Coast blackout and the other one is the San Diego area blackout.
You're right.
Those were huge
Right, and we're talking
penalties.
$25 million.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they're very huge, and this is public information, that's why I should.
Yeah, that's
Right.
why you can say that, yeah, that's.
No, those are and they were severe outages
Yeah.
that heavily impacted what the term of art is the bulk electric system, which I think you know that term, but the transmission system. And Mo made a very important distinction that, the SAIDI standard is, kind of involved with the distribution system, but if you don't have a robust transmission system, you're not adhering to the reliability standards and the SIP standards, you've got real problems, and you're going to have a big problem with NERC and with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So that's what we're trying to avoid. SPP and FERC, I've touched on this a little bit. I mentioned that the Southwest Power Pool is a public utility and thus is subject to FERC's jurisdiction. OPPD is a member of SPP, obviously monitors those proceedings because they affect us. Joe Lang and his group do a great job keeping on top of what's going on generally at FERC, and I help with that. And when needed, we use a Washington, D.C. law firm, Troutman Sanders. If we need a member of the club, if you will, it's like many other areas of Washington practice, very, very experienced people who practice in that area. OPPD's membership agreement and the addition of OPPD's transmission facilities to the SPP tariff were approved by FERC when OPPD joined the Southwest Power Pool. And that's important because we were able to, and when I say we, OPPD, NPPD, Nebraska Public Power District, and the Lincoln Electric System went in together, so really covering virtually the entire state of Nebraska in terms of transmission facilities. And we were pretty early in terms of public power entities going into regional transmission organizations. We were able to negotiate a membership agreement that very clearly recognized the primacy of the board of directors in establishing rates. And that's recognized in the membership agreement that was approved by FERC, so it has the force of law in that sense. Because FERC recognizes that we don't have to be a part of a regional transmission organization, but it's in the best interest of the country as a whole that we have as much of the bulk electric system, the transmission system, in a regional transmission organization. And you can see the impact that our participation in Southwest Power Pool has had as it's moved into the integrated marketplace with rates being lower and generally having the availability of greater capacity that's provided by the Southwest Power Pool. So it's been overall a good thing from the standpoint of energy policy. And FERC, very importantly, accommodated the entry of OPPD and other public power entities. And we try very hard to keep it that way because federal agencies will try to expand their jurisdiction. I know that's not a shock to anyone. And it's very important that they recognize that for public power entities like OPPD, it's very important that that element of local control be maintained and respected from a legal standpoint. These are a few of the recent proceedings that OPPD has been involved in. The first one is a pending docket that was initiated by FERC to look at the refund obligation I mentioned earlier. This is very common sense. If you're under a FERC-regulated rate, and you charge a customer or you're charging improperly, and that's determined to be the case, then you should refund the customers. And we would do the same thing under our jurisdiction. So it's very common sense. FERC had a situation, unfortunately, where a cooperative that's part of SPP actually had facilities that it was charging for under the SPP tariff and shouldn't have been. It's only a certain level, certain kilowatt level or megawatt level of facility that qualifies for the SPP tariff. That cooperative decided that it wouldn't refund, and it's the old adage that lawyers know bad facts sometimes can make bad law, and so FERC initiated a proceeding to try to enforce a refund obligation. That's alarming because this board establishes our rates. And as I said just a few moments ago, we want to make sure that we're protecting that legal authority and that legal right that's recognized in the membership agreement that OPPD signed when it entered SPP. So there's been a really robust stakeholder process at SPP. They've been very good about working with OPPD and the other public power entities within SPP, and I think we're ultimately going to work through that. But that's obviously something very important. I mean, if something's done wrong, we would obviously refund it, but you know, if it's an obvious mistake, that'll probably happen without board involvement. But if it's something that involved the board's rates that were established by the board, we would probably want to come back to the board and say, hey, the FERC has an issue with respect to what's being done here. We need to take a look at it, and then this board would act on it before there was an automatic refund obligation. That's what that's really all about. That may be more than you want to know, but it's obviously an important area for us. The second is an exemption from the PURPA must purchase requirement, and some of you may know what that's all about. PURPA is the Public Utilities Regulatory Policies Act that was added to the Federal Power Act in about 1978. Establishing a type of facility, independent facility called a qualifying facility, generally 80 megawatts or less, that can come into a service territory, put in a generation unit, and then come to the local utility and say, give me what your avoided cost is, the cost of buying the next megawatt of power, and I want you to buy from me. That's the must purchase element of that. OPPD has filed for an exemption from that requirement on the basis that the Southwest Power Pool provides a robust market for any qualifying facility that can simply connect into the transmission grid and sell into the Southwest Power Pool integrated marketplace. Other utilities within SPP have obtained that exemption, several of them, and the FERC has approved it. NPPD did that recently within the last year and a half. And so OPPD is engaged in that process because SPP does have a very, very good market, and it provides an outlet for those qualifying facilities.
And Steve, because of LB 824, a bill that Senator McAllister led, allowed for the ability for renewable generation to be built and sold into a market, didn't require a PPA. So those two items really,
that's a really good point.
We felt the exemption was important for us to pursue.
In other words, there are no obstacles to a qualifying facility having access to a market for its output. And that's why we're pursuing that. And then finally, a year to a year and a half ago, we were involved very closely. We worked closely with all of the transmission owning companies within the Southwest Power Pool, and occasionally we'll band together for economies of scale, hire a common law firm, for example, to work on a FERC facility. We did that in this case because MISO, next door neighbor, was utilizing SPP's transmission system to transmit energy to one of its largest customers, Entergy. This is all public record, which is located kind of right smack dab in the middle of SPP's area, right? And they were using our facilities because, of course, electricity goes where it goes on the transmission system. And our contention, when I say our contention, the contention of the transmission-owning members of SPP was, hey, we built that system, we should be compensated for its use. And so the proceeding was initiated on behalf of the transmission owners by SPP, and everyone intervened and participated. The result was a substantial settlement where MISO has to pay SPP, and then SPP sends the money back to the transmission owners. I think in OPPD's case, Mo, it was somewhere in excess of $1 million in that range per year. So it was a very significant effort. But those are examples of the kind of proceedings that we get involved in. There are others. Some of them are just more routine. But these give you an idea of what we monitor and what we will get involved in. We're a bit selective in terms of committing, resources, because you've got Southwest Power Pool folks actively working on these things, but we do get involved when we have to.
There's a recent one that's come up about energy efficiency moving into the wholesale market that FERC has just announced something on. I mean,
Were you thinking of are you thinking of the DOE grid resiliency rule, or which one?
If I knew better how to describe it, go ahead. No, the grid resiliency one that was started by FERC and went to or started by DOE and yeah. No, that's not the one I'm talking about.
Okay.
No, there's one about energy efficiency as part of a demand side management should be allowed into the wholesale marketplace. No? Yeah? Oh, you're familiar. Okay, this man can probably explain it better than me.
Well, I'm sure he can. And he can certainly explain it better than me.
Yeah, but you're not in a position to describe it now, and it doesn't sound like OPPD is involved in this?
So we have tracked it, and FERC has issued, so there's a lot of detail there, right? Because we went to the courts, and but if you have a question,
My ultimate question is OPPD or our attorney going to weigh in on this current FERC issue?
So I think the issue is settled in that the courts ruled that they do have jurisdiction. So the initial issue was, does FERC have jurisdiction over responsible resources?
And they said they did.
So the arguments were, well, that's a retail thing, and so do they have jurisdiction? And it was determined that they do have jurisdiction, and the reason being is, in batch, these demand side resources could be used as kind of negative generation in effect, generation dispatch in the transmission system. So it was held that they do have jurisdiction over those types of resources.
Okay. That was great. Thank you.
And that's really, that's an example of what I was talking about just a moment ago. Joe Lang, who just spoke, monitors all these things very closely. That's really a big part of his job. And then when legal needs to get involved, then he'll come to me. So I don't get involved in every proceeding. I try to keep myself informed, but that's one in which that Joe obviously handled very much on his own, and he does that in a lot of cases and does a great job.
And he has a few other jobs on top of that.
I know. It's pretty amazing. It's really, he does a great job. Other questions?
Well, we kind of touched on the grid resiliency. I think there was news yesterday. Could you kind of give us a quick summary of what impact, if any, and where that's at?
I think FERC is going, and Joe, feel free to weigh in. We just got the order yesterday. I haven't read the entire order. I glanced at it. Just to give you the background, the Department of Energy in September or early October of last year issued a rule, sent it to FERC, saying we would like you to pass this rule that would provide value in rates for units that have say, a 90-day supply of energy available. So you would provide some value for coal-fired generation, nuclear generation, because it has fuel available on site, and that's not really priced into the market the way it should be. That was the premise of the proposed rule from the Department of Energy. FERC evaluated that and sought comments for initially for 60 days. They extended that for another 30 days, and that 30 days was going to run tomorrow, actually January 10th. But yesterday, on January 8th, FERC issued an order saying we're not going to adopt the proposal from the Department of Energy, but we will initiate a process to evaluate energy reliability and grid resiliency in different ways. That's consistent, really, I would say, with the position that the majority of the industry took. There really, when you look at the facts, there really isn't a problem with grid resiliency, which is really the energy delivery system. It's very robust. There are strong arguments, pro or con, on reliability of generation resources and whether there should be more value placed on units that are 24/7 units that have a supply of fuel that aren't interruptible and so forth. That's an ongoing discussion, and there are facts on both sides. But I think it was a step too far at this time for FERC to actually adopt a rule to put into rates some way of valuing that. And I think there were concerns about impact, frankly, on customers as well.
And I'll be honest with you, I think this was a segment industry issue. Let's use the nuclear industry. And rather than trying to go to individual states to get the recovery of certain rates or cost, like some have done in New York and some have done in Chicago, this was really an opportunity to look at how do you do it federally so they don't have to piecemeal their strategy to keep their plants up and operating in very competitive markets, to be very honest with you. And so, so that was a kind of a specific industry seeking that kind of recovery mechanism and determining what that would look like. And my guess is FERC will kind of say, hey, that should probably move back to the RTOs or the ISOs to determine how best to address that within their regions.
I think that's exactly what they did, yeah. I mean, from a grid resiliency perspective, they push it back to the RTOs and to NERC to figure out what needs to be done from that perspective.
So, Director Moody, we will obviously continue to monitor that, and going forward, and if there's ever information that you or other board members need, we're happy to provide it.
So on that, didn't they, rather than making a determination, didn't they make a determination and then say they were going to continue to study?
Yeah, they're going to continue to study.
Okay, all right.
But I think it will ultimately, I think the RTOs will have a large role in that, as they should. So, other questions?
Conversation under the rule,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's occurring in the industry.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Well, thank you for the opportunity to make
No, that was
this
great.
presentation.
Thanks,
Steve. Yeah.
Go to exec session now. Yeah. All right.
Can I make a correction to something I said because I misspoke and I apologize for it? The FBG contract, I just want to be clear. It is a 5-year contract. That amount there is the per year amount.
Correct.
It's over a $5 million. So I just wanted to correct that. I
Okay, thank
confused
you.
it with a different contract.
No
I
problem. Thanks, Kate.
apologize.
No problem. Okay, now I think I'm good saying that we're going to executive session for 3 matters, and we'd ask you to
Going to
clear
closed
the room.
session at this time is 11:48 a.m. to discuss the district's pending and potential litigation matters, a cybersecurity update, and corporate officer performance reviews and compensation matters relating to the reviews of Kate Brown, Vice President of Building Technology and Building Services, and Mo Dogman, Vice President of Energy Delivery. With respect to litigation matters, the discussion of these matters involves legal advice that is covered by attorney-client privileges and work product that is protected by attorney-work product doctrine. With respect to cybersecurity matters, a closed session is necessary to obtain a financial briefing on threats to the district's systems and proactive measures and strategies to protect against such threats. The information pertains to the protection of the security of public property and may include vulnerability assessments or specific unique response plans, which are intended to prevent the mitigation or mitigate criminal acts, and the public disclosure of which would create a substantial likelihood of endangering public safety or public property. Cybersecurity discussion will also address computer or communication network schema and public utility infrastructure specifics or specifications, the public disclosure of which would create substantial likelihood of endangered public safety or property with respect to two corporate officer performance reviews and compensation matters. A closed session is necessary to prevent needless injury to the reputation of the individuals involved, and neither corporate officer has required a public meeting.
What did you say? What was that third paragraph?
Steve, you gotta quit it.
That's called covering your you-know-what.
I need
All
a
right, we need
second.
a second.
I second.
All right.
Barrett, Snyder, Kavanaugh.
Yes.
Gay.
Yes.
No. Yes.
Mine.
Yes.
Moody.
My
Trinan.
computer's.
Yoder.
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right, the motion to go into closed session is passed. This closed session will be limited to discussion regarding the district's pending and potential litigation matters, a cybersecurity update, two corporate officer performance reviews and comp matters. No votes or board action will be taken during this closed session. All right, thanks. Well, a motion and a second is required to reconvene into open session.
Barrett.
Yes.
Kavanaugh. Gay.
Yes.
McGuire.
Yes.
Mines. Moody. Trinan. Yoder. Motion carried.
All right, the motion to come out of closed session at 1:55 PM is carried. This closed session was limited to discussion regarding pending and potential litigation matters, a cybersecurity update, and two corporate officer performance reviews and compensation matters. No votes or board action were taken during this closed session. Thank you. That we're adjourned until.